Okay, so now let's apply, that theory to the charts. Again, we are only focusing on swing structure for now, and just to map it out, just the mechanical rules. We'll talk about how to combine, our other confluences together in a minute, and how to interpret things and how to build trade ideas. But for now, we just need to focus on the individual parts, nail those first, and then we can, start to bring them all in together. So here I'm on euro dollar on the 4-hour chart. Okay, I'm using the forex.com data feed, and I've brought price back using bar replay back to the start of October 2021. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the price action, with you up until the end of 2021, and then I'm going to give you a date range to go and do your own bit of homework. Right, try it yourself, see where the gaps are on your knowledge and your understanding, and then we'll go through that, and you can compare your analysis to mine. Okay, cool. So, like I was always saying, whenever you have a blank chart, the first thing you ever need to do is find where is my current active swing high, right, and my current swing low, because then you will know what swing range you are working within. And then you build everything from there. Okay, so what can typically be easy to do is try and find or go back to an area where you've had like a clear impulsive move down and a clear pullback and a clear break, because that way you know that you're starting off in the right area. Because sometimes you can be a little bit too zoomed in and you might start mapping like your swing high and swing low. Obviously this isn't a very good example, but you can end up mapping what you think is a swing high and swing low, whereas if you zoom out you actually realize you're mapping internal structure. Okay, so you always kind of want to just make sure there's a nice impulsive move, and then you've got pretty high degree of confidence that you're mapping in the right place. Okay, so we have a 4-hour break of structure here, right? And then you can use over here these circles. So if you go to the icons over here, you can find a circle. So click the circle and then you can do that, right? So you can pre-save templates as well. Like I've got a 4-hour circle here. This will come in handy when we do multi-time frame analysis, because if you then go to the settings, you can go into the visibility and you can make sure that it only appears on the same time frame that you're looking at, okay? And you can play around with the style, the color, and all those things. Now, if you want to resize it, you want to basically click the left or right, doesn't matter, and then you drag it like this, right? And you can play around it with it like that if you want it bigger or smaller, okay? So as we can see, we have pretty clear bearish trend. We have quite a sizable pullback, relative to the recent price action. It makes sense, right? We can see price come to the downside, it pulls back, we get a break of structure. There's your strong high. Price pulls back up into the strong high, but it doesn't break it. And then we get another break and close below, giving us another break of structure. Okay, so at that point, we would have this as our new swing high. This is our new swing low. Price pulls back, right? Obviously doesn't break the high. And then we come down and we break and close below. So we have a confirmed 4-hour swing break of structure here. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, okay? So straight away, we know that this is our 4-hour, whoops, don't know what I've done there. Strong swing high. Okay, just gonna make the text a little bit bigger for you guys. Right, because in a bearish swing market, as soon as we get that break and closure below, we can look back and straight away we know that this is our high. Why is that high? Well, you look for the highest point this should be the low there. From the highest point from where the low was printed to where it was broken, drag your box to the upside, right? And then that becomes your high. It's the highest point that went on to break this swing low, right? Again, we can put our circle here. Okay, cool. So at this point, we know where our swing high is, but we don't know where the swing low is until we have, a relatively significant pullback compared to the recent price action. So I will just move this forward, okay? And then we start to have like a pretty decent pullback, right, compared to the previous price action. So I'm going to be happy in this instance to mark this out as our swing low, and then we know that we can do this as well, right? You don't have to do this in live market, but it can always help you to know, especially if we get some more complex price action, just to know what swing range we are within. Okay, so I'm going to mark this out as our 4-hour week structure, okay, because we expect this to be targeted because it's a weak low, because it hasn't taken out the swing high, right? So we've had that swing pullback. This is the current range that we are trading within. So just like fractal structure, we do nothing until the high or the low is broken. So at this moment here, we have a break and close below the 4-hour swing low at this exact moment. So if I actually bring it back one candle, let's move this out of the way. At this exact moment in the live market, now the difference, again, remember, between fractal structure and swing structure is because we need a candle body close, you have to wait for this candle to close. You have to wait for this 4-hour candle to finish printing before you can confirm that we've had a swing breakup structure and before you can confirm where the new swing range is. Because otherwise what can happen sometimes is price can move down whilst it's printing like this, and then it can come back up and close back up here. And obviously that wouldn't be a candle body close. So it wouldn't be a confirmed break of structure, and you would need to leave your swing high up here, right? But in this instance, we've had the break, we've had the close below, we can draw that as our boss. And now where's our new swing high? It's the highest point after this low was printed, which is going to be up here, okay? So now we can move this to the downside, to our new swing high, right? And then that becomes our new level, right? And we don't know where the swing low is until we've had what we deem to be a significant pullback relative to recent price action. As we can see here, right, that's obviously a sizable pullback compared to there. So we can mark that out as our swing low. Now let's see what happens next. Okay, so we have that breaker structure to the upside. So I'm just gonna move this out of the way. And now the swing trend has shifted bullish because we've had a break and close above the swing high. So again, straight away, as soon as we get that candle closure and the confirmed boss, where is our swing low? It's the lowest point that broke the high. So with fractal structure, we look for the nearest, but for swing, we always want to look for the lowest because we want to be conservative. In this case, the swing low stays in the same place, but this time, because this low, well, initially it was weak, right? But it went on to break the high. So now it becomes strong, right? So now, because the trend is bullish, our swing lows become strong lows because they are taking out the highs, right? It's a strong high. But we don't know where the swing high is until price has what we deem to be a significant pullback. So not quite convinced just yet. Let's see. Okay, now that's a pretty decent pullback, right, compared to the recent price action. I'd be happy to mark that out as my new swing high, right? And obviously this is weak because so far it hasn't broken any swing structure, okay? And that's the range we're within, and we do nothing until we see either a break and close above the swing high or the swing low. So now we get a boss, so we can, again, draw this on here, all right? And we get our swing breaker structure. Cool. Now, where's our swing low? It's the lowest point that took out the high. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker now, right? For the sake of time, we adjust our new swing range to here. What do we expect after a swing breaker structure? We expect a swing pullback, but it's not always going to happen straight away, okay? Now, as we go obviously through the lessons, you're going to learn all the confluence that we use in order to anticipate when that swing pullback may be starting and ending, okay? But for now, we're just looking at mapping out these swing highs and the swing lows, okay? So relative to recent price action, that's a pretty decent sized pullback. So I'm happy to mark that out as the swing high, right? We have that as our weak swing structure, so on and so forth. Now, let's see what happens next. Okay, so definitely having that swing pullback. Is this strong low going to hold, or are we going to shift bearish? We never know, right? We can never assume structure, but we just run with the expectation that strong lows will hold until they don't, right? That's the expectation we work with. So we don't have to try and second guess. And there we go. Then we get the confirmed breaker structure, we get the candle close above, and that bullish trend is continuing, okay? And now we adjust the strong low to the lowest point that took out the high after the high was printed, right? And that's why this becomes the new strong swing low. And then we pull back, and then we end up breaking it to the downside, okay? And now we've had our bearish boss. So this becomes our new swing high. Remember the highest point that goes on to break the low after the low was printed. This then becomes our strong structure. Why is it strong? It's strong because it took out the low, it broke a low, right? It did its job, and now we are bearish. So let's play price forward. Okay, that's a pretty significant pullback compared to the recent price actions. We can mark that out as our strong low, sorry, our swing low. But in this case, it's weak. Why is it weak? Because it's failed to take out the strong high, right? I'm gonna go a little bit quicker if I can. And then again, we do nothing until either the low or high is broken. We don't have a break yet. Why don't we have a break? Because there's no candle body close. So we do nothing just yet. The swing high and low remains in its place. And then we finally get the break and close below. So that's when we get our true swing breaker structure, right? Now, where's the highest point that took out this low? Again, if you're ever confused, draw a box from the low to where it's broken and then drag it up. And you can see, right? This is our new highest point in that box. Okay, it's actually just here, I believe, yeah. And that becomes our new swing high. Again, you can put your pretty little circle. As soon as we have that break and closure below, in a bearish market, we always know where the swing high is. It's 100% mechanical. The only bit that's a little bit discretionary, right, at least the way that I do it, is we can't mark out where that swing low is until we've had a significant enough pullback, okay? So now, again, relative to recent price action, that is a significant pullback. So I'm going to mark this out as the weak swing low. All right, so let's see, is that strong high going to hold, or are we going to shift bullish? holding, and then we get, yeah, just about get that break and close below. So we've had a continuation of the bearish trend here, right? Okay, cool. So highest point that broke out the low, we can mark it here and beyond. Just do a couple more examples and then I'll give you guys some homework to do. All right, and then we move down. Okay. So here, this is kind of what I was hoping I was going to see, right? Is this swing structure? Okay, I would say, again, because I'm using discretion, so there's some room for argument here, but I would say relative to recent price action, that is not significant, right? If you look at all of these, that's more of a pause in the market. That's what I refer to as internal structure, okay? So I'm not going to refer to that as a swing structure or refer to that as a boss. Now, the reason why is because if price, if I call that a swing low at this point and then price breaks it, well, then that would have to be my new swing high. So then price breaks it and then broke that to the upside. For me, the 4-hour chart wouldn't be bullish because I'll just be expecting this, right? And that's why, for me, it's not really that significant. So I wouldn't refer to that swing structure relative to recent price action, okay? And that would just be a continuation of this one swing leg, right? This is all just one move. It's a bit of a pause, a bit of an internal pullback, and that's one leg. This would still be the strong swing high for me in this instance, okay? Again, just a pause in price action, just an internal pullback. That's not significant relative to the recent price action. So for me, this is all one leg, okay? Now we've got more of a, you see, relative to the recent price action, now I can put my pretty little gray circle on the swing low, and that is me mapping out swing structure, okay? And that's the large swing range we're gonna be in, okay? So sometimes you'll get kind of tight ranges, and sometimes you'll get larger ones. It is what it is. As volatility picks up and changes, that's just the nature of the market, okay? Now, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just move this along a little bit quicker and I'll get to the end of 2021 and then I'll give you guys a bit more homework. So don't get a break and close below yet. And then we get it, right? So now you can move this down to here, get a break and close below, and then boom, that's your new swing high there, right? And then there we go, okay? Cool. So what I'm going to do, just don't want this video to go on for hours because you guys probably get it. I'm going to, let's say, take this onwards from now. So this is the 22nd of November 2021. I would say go to the end of, let's say, the end of March, right? So do to the 1st of April 2022. And then what I'll do is I'll go through that with you guys. And then for any price action past that, I'll just put markups in the notes below the video, okay? So pause the video now, you guys go away and do that, and then come and compare back. Okay, so hopefully you've done that to the 1st of April 2022, and now let's crack on with it. So we have price moving down. Again, that's just a bit of a pause in price action compared to recent price action. Okay, now this is a bit more significant. Let's map on our swing low here, and that will do, okay? Cool, so let's see what happens. No break or close above, so we're still bearish. Still bearish. A little bit quicker. I remember this price action, this is towards the end of the year. So yeah, we had horrible price action. It was super range bound for quite some time, stuck between the high and the low. Let's see what happens. Okay, and then we eventually get that swing breaker structure over here, right? So just gonna do this. And bring this in. Okay, so we finally got a break. Whoops. So that should be there. And then we finally got a break and close above the high. Now, at that exact moment that we shift bullish on the 4-hour chart, where's our swing low? It's the lowest point that took out the high after it was printed. So this can be a bit confusing. So this is where the box tool can come in handy because you draw it from the high, drag it across to where it was broken, right? Oops, and then drag it down, and this is the lowest point in that box, okay? After the high was printed to where it was broken, where's the lowest point? It remains in the place in which it was already at. But this weak low has now become strong, right? Because it broke the high, right? So now, excuse me, just gonna drag this over here to save that template. Now this becomes our strong swing low at this exact moment. The moment we get that break and closure above, this is our strong swing low, okay? Okay, that's a reasonably decent pullback compared to recent price action. So I'm happy to mark that out as my swing high here. Okay, we can map this out here. That's our weak structure. So we have 4 hour bullish structure at the moment. Do nothing until the high or low is broken when we're just looking at swing structure. Do we get a break and close above? Yes, we do. Okay, there's another boss. Cool, there we go. And there's our swing low, okay? So at this moment, you can obviously adjust this to be your strong low here. All right, so on and so forth. And then this is our strong high, sorry, weak high here, right? Now we've had a sizable pullback relative to recent price action. Remember, after a boss, what do we expect? We expect a pullback on that time frame, and that's what we've started to get. But what do we expect? We expect a strong low to hold, right? And maybe it won't, maybe it will, but we just run with that mechanical framework that we expect strong structure to hold, okay? Let's see what happens next. So we don't get closed below. Do we get closed below? Yes, we do. So now the trend has shifted bearish, right? And we've had that bearish breaker structure. So where is the new swing high? When we look back, so remember, as soon as in a bearish market, as soon as we get the boss, we know where the swing high is. It's the highest point that broke the low after the low was printed. So drag it along your boss line, drag it up, the high stays in the same place, but it becomes strong. Why does it become strong? It becomes strong because it did its job. It took out a strong low. So now it becomes a strong high, right? But we can't mark out the swing low, the new swing low, until what? Until we've had a significant pullback relative to recent price action. Okay, that's pretty significant. So now I'm going to put on my pretty grey circle, and this can become the new swing range we are within, right? This is the new bearish 4-hour swing range. So let's play price forward and let's see what happens. Are we going to get a breaker structure? No, we just wick it. We don't close above. We get another wick of it, so we don't close above. So it's messy price action, right? But we're still traded between this swing high and this swing low. So let's see what happens. Do we get a break and close below? No, right? So now we're just taking the lows and sweeping the highs, but we still have not had a confirmed swing breaker structure yet until we get a break and close below. Are we finally going to get it? Okay, yes, we are. So the trend actually stayed bearish. It pulled up to the strong high. It did breach it, right? It attempted to, but it never got a break and close. Twice it failed, and then eventually the bearish trend continued. And that's why, well, this is a great example of why for swing structure, we want to see that commitment. We want to see, was there enough demand in the market, right? Was there strong enough strength to cause price to break and close above? In this instance, no, okay. So now we eventually get that bearish breaker structure. Just gonna move this out of the way. Here, okay, boom. Now, as soon as we get that break and close below, we know we've had a boss. Where is the swing high? Well, remember the rules, and this is where it comes in, where it can be a little bit more complex. We draw our box from the low to where it was broken, and we drag it up, right? Where is the highest point in this box? The highest point you can put your circle on, and it becomes here, okay? So although the bearish trend, right, we had a swing high here, we had a movement down, and we pull back, and in theory, it should be a lower high, right, if the trend is going to continue. Well, the trend did continue because we never had a bullish boss, we never had a bullish close, and we continued the bearish trend. But how can the lower high be higher than the high, right? Because technically we have a higher high, but this is just one of those tricky scenarios, okay? So the trend has continued, it has stayed bearish, but when we get that break, if price had that spike higher, yes, this does become our new high. So it technically is higher, but that's just the way it goes, okay? So I appreciate sometimes that can be a bit confusing, but this is the continued bearish trend, and that is our new swing range that we are within, okay? Cool, so hopefully that makes sense. But sometimes you get those complex scenarios where you have those liquidity grabs, where you have price spike higher, that the new swing high then can actually become higher in a bearish market, right? Let's see how this goes. Waiting for a significant pullback relative to recent price action. Okay, that's pretty significant. So we can mark on our new swing low, right? And then we just go to the end of this month. Hopefully you guys have done that with your homework. And then, yeah, there we'll have it. Okay. Again, just being silent because obviously it's a bit boring. We're only using swing structure. Obviously in the live market, there's a lot more here to analyze, but for swing structure, it's pretty simple. We're just waiting for price to break and close below either the swing low or the swing high. We're gonna get it. Oh, no, not quite. And there we go. I think we get it there, yeah. So we finally get the break and close below. Obviously the highest point, I hope you guys should get this now, would be this level here. And then that brings us into April, okay? So I'll tell you what, I'll just do a few more examples just for the sake of it. I mean, if you feel pretty comfortable with this, I guess feel free to head on to other lessons. But if some of you want to have a few more examples, of the head. I'll do to the end of April and let's see what we get. Okay, that's a pretty significant pullback compared to recent price action. Okay, so I should have had that there, sorry. At this point, as soon as we know where the swing low is, you can map out your swing range, right? This was obviously that swing breaker structure back here. So this was your boss. Right, that's the highest point. So this is the current range we're within. Price can do whatever it wants, right? It can pull all the way up to here, but if the bearish trend is going to continue, then price shouldn't break and close above that high. And that's the expectation. Whoops, just not the mic, that we run with price action. And then we get a break and close below, right? So on and so forth. So pretty simple stuff, hopefully. But yeah, this will become super powerful when we start to combine it with the other price action. And then obviously this becomes our high, the highest point that broke out the low. And I'll just do this to the end of this current month and then we'll probably call it a day. Okay. No pullback yet. All right, now I would say that's pretty significant compared to recent price action. I'd be happy to call that a swing low. All right, and then you can map that on and that brings us into May, okay? Cool, so yeah, swing structure I think is relatively simple. It's there or thereabouts mechanical. Obviously in a bearish market, the only bit that's discretionary, right? The way that I use it is defining what's deemed to be significant enough as a pullback. Excuse me, but as you learn the rest of the concepts that we use, i.e. internal and fractal structure and how to interpret it with swing structure, and also bringing in multi-time frame analysis, you'll realize that it doesn't really matter too much. Some of you will be a bit more aggressive and you only look for shallow pullbacks enough to be significant. Some of you will want to see very deep pullbacks and you'll be a bit more conservative. But I'll show you later on in this module that it doesn't actually matter too much because it's all about how you manage your expectations of price. That sounds like a bit of a riddle, but it will all make a lot more sense as we go through the lesson. So yeah, hope you guys took some value from that and I'll see you in the next one. So as you've now hopefully seen, mapping swing structure with the way that we do is, I would argue, pretty damn mechanical. Obviously, the only element of discretion with the way that we map swing structure is just what we deem to be significant enough of a swing pullback, okay? So super quick refresher. Let's say the swing structure is bullish. As soon as that swing high is broken, right, and we get the candle body closure above that high, we know straight away that the swing low is going to be the lowest point, right? I could do a bit more of a complex example. But we get the breaker structure here. At that point, we know it's not this low, it's not this low. It's definitely, this is the new swing low, right? Because it's the lowest point that broke the high. So you can code that. There's no if, buts, or maybes. It's 100% mechanical. Where it gets a bit discretionary is when we get that break of this high, right? And we're obviously forming a higher high. It's like, at what point can we draw on our swing high line? And the reason why that's important is because let's say price pulls back a little bit. You don't necessarily want to draw that on as your swing high straight away, because then if you do, if price then moves up and breaks it, right, that means you've had a swing breaker structure, which then means this is your new swing low, which then means if price breaks this low to the downside, now your swing trend is bearish. But if we just draw this on for a minute, it's just a bit visually easier to see. And then we'll put on some bosses. Let's use a thick line. Okay, so like I was saying, right, when we got that little pullback there, if you marked that out as your swing high and now you're saying that the swing trend is bearish, is it really bearish, or are we just pulling back into this larger low, right? Because I would argue if it was something like that, like relative to the recent price action, that's just a pullback into this level. So now you're saying we're bearish and then the price comes up, then you could be looking to get short from here, but you're probably more likely going to be on the wrong side of the market because you'll think you're shorting like pro trend because you saw that as the last boss and you're looking to get short here. But I would argue that that's just internal or fractal breaker structure for price to pull back into the discount of this swing leg to then continue higher, right? So that's why it's kind of like important that you want to have, you want to be focusing on those larger swings. But obviously, it can help to be quite mechanical with this, especially in the beginning, until you gain a little bit more experience. So what you can do to define what you deem to be significant enough of a pullback when price pulls back to go, okay, now I'm happy to mark on my swing high, is you can use a pip rule. Where basically you would go, okay, we're on euro dollar and we're on the 4-hour chart. So for that pair on that time frame, let's say I'm going to make up a number here, you need to see 100 pip pullback. So after we get the boss, only once price pulls back 100 pips. Okay, now imagine this is 100 pips, right? You can measure it. So if you hold down shift and click, you can do this and it tells you how many pips there are. So that says 1968. You need to put that last number as a decimal point. Okay, so if it says 1968, that's 196.8 pips, right? So let's say you're looking for 100 pips. That would be 100 pip pullback. Okay, obviously it's not great in this example, but that's when you go, okay, now I'm happy to now mark this out as my swing high, right? Because you have a fixed pip rule. So question then probably you're asking is, well, how do I come up with a fixed pip rule? Well, let me tell you the magic formula to finding out the magical pip rule of the market. You just draw it on with your naked eye, whatever you deem to be swing structure, just like we have done in the previous couple of lessons. And then what you do, like let's say you did it this way and you go, yeah, these all look like clear swings to me. This makes sense. Then go and measure every single swing pullback that you did, right? So again, hold down shift and then click, and then you can drag this up to where the swing high is. And there you go. What does that say? It says 4161. So it's 4. Remember that last number is a decimal point. So it's 416 pips. Okay. So you've measured that one. You know, you could either just do this, go, okay, quick note with a speech bubble, go 416 pips. Okay. How big was this one? Exact same process. That was 190 pips roughly, right? So you go 190 pips. Now, what you want to do is you want to do that for about, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 examples, recent examples, and just measure like what was the minimum pip size pullback you did. And let's say this was the smallest swing pullback you did out of all of them. You go, right, but my minimum size is 190. That now becomes your current rule. You'll go, right, for me to define a swing pullback on the 4-hour chart, so specific to that time frame and specific to that currency pair, you now know that you want to see at least 190 pips, okay? So what that will mean is, let's say we're at this point in the market, all right, and you've had your bearish swing boss and price is pulling back. You're like, okay, we're pulling back, but you can't put your pretty swing low circle or draw your swing low line across until what? Until prices pull back 190 pips, which as we know will be around here, right? So you know it's only once price pulls back up to here, at that point you go, okay, we've had 190 pip pullback now. Now I'm going to draw on my swing low line, right? That's what you can do. And that's essentially how your pip rules work. So again, how you come up with that is you have to do it with your naked eye first. Draw on just everything that looks to you with swing structure, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to explain to you in a later lesson where it doesn't matter if you're someone who likes to focus on the bigger swings, or maybe you're someone who likes to focus on the smaller swings. So like over here, right? After we got this break of structure, I didn't, in this instance, view that as a swing pullback. But some of you might think, no, that is a swing pullback, right? And all that means is then you would have that as your swing break, then your swing break here, and then your swing break here, okay? And that's fine. It doesn't matter, and I'll talk about this in a later video, right? The point I'm trying to make in this video is draw on what to you is a significant enough pullback, right? And then once you've done that, like we have done here for like, you know, a decent amount of examples, just go and measure them. Go, okay, and find out what your minimum pip size pullback was. So this one was a little bit smaller actually. That was about 178 pips. And that can become your rule. And that's how you do it. But the key thing is you need to have a rule for each time frame that you use and for each individual instrument or pair that you trade, okay? And the reason why that is important is because, well, let's just think about one pair. Every time frame is going to move a different amount, right? This 180 pip pullback on, say, the daily chart, that's not going to be a swing pullback, is it, right? The daily chart probably going to want to see a lot more. On the M15, that's going to be, you know, multiple trends. So it's specific to the time frame you're looking at and also specific to the pair, because the amount of volatility that each instrument has will always differ, okay? So people refer to this as the average true range, the ATR, and essentially that measures how many pips that instrument typically moves in a day, okay? So the average true range or the daily volatility of euro dollar, it typically is a bit more than Aussie dollar. Pound dollar, on the other hand, it moves way more in a day than euro dollar does. So it'd have a much higher ATR. So if you traded, let's say, euro dollar and pound dollar, you're much more likely to have a much bigger pip rule for pound dollar on the 4-hour chart compared to euro dollar, okay? So if you trade more than one instrument, you need to have rules. If you're going to do this, you need to have rules different for each one, but you just follow the same process, okay? So obviously that's a main drawback, is if you are someone who maybe trades a lot of instruments or you want to look at a new instrument, you're going to have to go through this process to find out what rule you want to use. A related drawback to that is that volatility also changes over time. So like if we go back to, let's say over here, right? You know, these pullbacks on the 4-hour chart, these swings, well, how big is this? That's like 55 pips as a swing pullback. And back then, in 2021, like I think I used, like a 40 pip rule for the 4-hour chart. And that worked absolutely fine because volatility wasn't as high as now. Well, now I'm looking at like hundreds of pips on the 4-hour chart because volatility has massively increased since 2021, right? So the way you come around this is you just need to adjust your pip rules every so often. If you notice that, let's say, like if you were in 2021, you used a 40 pip rule, but now obviously we're in 2022. And like, look at that, 40 pips is about there. That's clearly not a swing pullback now because volatility is way higher. So it will become obvious to you that you need to adjust your pip rules. And when that happens, okay, fine. Draw on the recent, just go through the same process. Draw on your swing structure on the recent price action and go, okay, what's the pip size rule that now makes sense? And there we go. It's nothing magic. It doesn't matter if yours is smaller or larger than someone else's, okay? Size doesn't matter in this instance. But yeah, and also you will see this in a later lesson. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet. Probably put it at the end of this module. Probably call it something silly like, does swing structure really matter? And in that video, I'll prove to you that it doesn't matter if you're someone who uses it smaller or tighter, because you're going to learn obviously the 3 types of structure. And when you combine that with multi-time frame analysis, it really won't matter, okay? And you'll see why at a later point. But just for now, I just wanted to show you one way in which you could make things 100% mechanical if you wanted to do it. But obviously there are some drawbacks to that, which we have discussed. Now, there may be some other methods that you can use. You may want to look into using something based on ATR, like a calculation based on volatility. I haven't played around with this. I haven't dug into it. I haven't tested anything like that because I've just found it completely unnecessary. I'm very happy to use a little bit of discretion with measuring swing pullbacks, and with a little bit of time and experience, I'm sure you'll be comfortable with that as well. Especially again, when you combine it with the 3 types of structure and multi-time frame analysis, you will soon realize when you understand that it really doesn't matter that much. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Don't be afraid to just draw it on of what makes most sense to you. Measure your pip rules, and again, don't be afraid to adjust them in the future if volatility does change. So now we are going to revisit the 3 types of structure, which hopefully, you already saw that introduction to this towards the start of the module where, we spoke about the 3 types of structure that we're going to use. So swing structure, internal structure, and fractal structure. Now, the last few lessons, we've kind of broken those down into their individual parts, right? So we spent quite a while really breaking down fractal structure, looking at how we identify those changes of character, right? You've seen how that method is 100% mechanical. I have yet to find a scenario in price action where, it required discretion. It's 100% mechanical. There are no if, buts, or maybes, right? Can be a little bit tricky to get your head around at first, but hopefully with a bit of practice, you should be very familiar with identifying and knowing how to read it. Now, the bit that will, from going forward, will take a bit more experience, which you will learn as you'll get with time, is knowing when and when not to pay attention to it, when and when not to use it, when and when not it is or isn't useful information, okay? So that's kind of what we're going to start to think about more is, when you've now learned how to identify these individual concepts that we use, it's now more about how do we start to put them together to use as a framework to read and understand price action, right? So we can have an expectation of what we think is most likely going to happen next in the market based on probabilities, right? Never certainties, always probabilities. And then that allows us to build trade ideas, right? And that's kind of what we're slowly going to start to do now. Try and put them together. Obviously, it's going to get a little bit more complex, but we'll take our time and do that. So yeah, like I was saying, we've individually looked at fractal structure. So hopefully you should be, somewhat pretty familiar and comfortable with it. I would kind of recommend, if you're not, don't keep plowing through the lessons now. Go back through, do the recommended practice exercises, compare them to the walkthroughs, and get as comfortable as you can with it. And then similarly, we have looked at swing structure, right? We've really kind of broken this down into its own individual parts. You should hopefully now fully understand the rules of how to draw and identify it. And obviously gone through the charts to look at real price action examples of that. But again, now, we're going to start to put these all together to see how we can actually, read price action. So the only piece we haven't gone and looked at on its own is the internal structure. Okay. Now, I was originally planning to kind of do its own individual lessons on it, just like we have for swing and fractal. But really, you can't draw your internal structure unless you already are drawing your swing structure. You kind of have to have them both at the same time. So, I just thought may as well just kind of jump straight into putting all 3 types together now. And I think it will make a lot more sense. So As always, before we jump on the charts and go through actual price action, I just want to go through a couple of theoretical chart examples, diagrams, just to go over the rules and the framework in which we use before we go on to actual price action. So this diagram in front of us, this is a slightly more simplified version of the one that we went through in the intro to the 3 types of structure video, which we'll go on to in a minute. So again, let's just go through this nice and slowly. So in this case, we have bearish swing structure, okay? We have a big swing push down, that sizable swing pullback, okay? So once we get that sizable swing pullback, that either meets, if we're using discretion and we think that's a sizable enough of a swing pullback relative to recent price action, then what can we do? We can put on our pretty circle that says for us that's a swing low. So then we know that when price comes down and breaks and we get a candle body closure below that low, remember for swing boss we need a candle body closure. Once we get that in price action, we then have a confirmed swing break of structure. The exact moment that the candle body closes below that previous swing low and we get that confirmed swing break of structure, what can we then do? We can then use the box method if you need it right, where you draw it between the swing low to where the swing low is broken and you drag it to the upside, and then the highest point in that box is essentially your new swing high. So that at the exact moment that the candle closes below that break of structure line, we just look back for where was the highest point after this low was printed. Basically, in more simple terms, right, we're trying to find where is the height of that swing pullback. We want to find the highest point of the swing pullback, and that becomes our new swing high, right? That's in essence what we're trying to do there. Then we get another swing move to the downside, okay? So what do we expect after a swing break of structure? We expect a swing pullback to kick in at some point, okay? We never know when it will happen, but we have to start. The moment this happens in the real markets, yes, we can continue to keep looking to short this or hold on to any shorts that we're already within, right, if we're managing those trades. But you just have to always say to yourself the same repetitive line so you never forget, after a swing break of structure, we expect a swing pullback. And if you always tell yourself that, it can really help you to, know when not to be aggressive and keep trying to short this, and to start thinking about management of any shorts you may already be in, okay? It becomes lower probability essentially to keep shorting when we're down here, because we know at any point that pullback can start to happen, okay? And that's kind of the main thing I want you to remember from that. So obviously, once we get that swing breaker structure, we expect the swing pullback. There's a lot of confluence and concepts that we can use to anticipate when this pullback may happen and how we can even try and get in to buy this and get long and trade that, okay? But obviously for this lesson, but particularly this structure in this module, we're only going to be focusing on market structure, okay? And that's all I want you to be thinking about. And for now, just one time frame as well, okay? So after we get this swing breaker structure and we have that swing leg to the downside, very often the first thing that's going to happen in terms of bullish structure coming in is you'll get that bullish change of character where we look at the fractal structure. So when we're literally just looking at those, we're looking at all the candles lows keep breaking. Okay, as soon as one candle fails to break the previous candle's low, that's when we get that fractal pullback. Right, and then we get a pullback and then a continuation of that fractal structure, and then if price breaks it to the upside, that's our bullish change of character, okay? So that's the most aggressive type of structure break, a bullish chalk, right, when the fractal structure changes from bearish to bullish. Now when that happens, yes, that is the very, very, very first structural indication that that swing pullback may be happening, okay? But it is not confirmation of a swing pullback. We need a bullish internal breaker structure, which is an IBOS, which we'll get into in a minute. That's what confirms the swing breaker structure. And the reason why we use an IBOS, so an internal breaker structure, is because what can often happen in the live market is because change of character is very, very aggressive, right? We're just literally looking at the little candles. So what can often happen in the live market is when we get these swing breaks of structure to the downside, is you can get price pulling back, right? A little 1 or 2 candles pauses where we get that fractal pullback. Price can come down, and then it can break that high, and you can get a change of character. And then you could think, okay, well, now we've had a bullish change of character. Now the swing pullback must be starting. And then you try and buy this and get in long. But what can often happen, especially if price is, a lot of momentum to the downside, is you can get stopped out, right? And again, we can have another bullish change of character, and then we can look to buy, and you can get stopped out. And you're trying to catch a falling knife, and you keep getting caught out. You're seeing the bullish change of characters, but they're not following through. And then the overall swing trend is too strong, okay? And that's why I said, right, change of character is very, very aggressive, and it can catch you out a lot. So that's why we have to pair chalk, change of character, with lots of other confluence, okay? Which again, you'll get a feel for this. So The point I'm trying to make here is change of character when we get that bullish chalk. That just signals at that moment that we're having an internal pullback, okay? And what that means, what internal structure is essentially, it's when you get a pullback or a movement in price that it's larger than fractal structure. So I'm not just looking at the candles, when you can see like multiple movements like this, but it's not quite big enough for us to deem it to be swing structure just yet, okay? Because what can happen is you can have a swing movement down, a big swing pullback, right? Then you get a break of that low. All right, and then you get a little fractal pullback like that, where it could be a few candles. But sometimes you can get, a bit more of that, a bit more of a pullback, right? And then price continues down, but it's just not quite big enough to be swing structure, okay? It's more of like a little, well, what we call an internal pullback, okay? So it's not until you get a break of that high here, like an IBOS like that, that's when we have a lot more confirmation now that we're getting the larger swing pullback, okay? So now that would be a swing low, that would be a swing high, right? And that's the swing range we're from within, okay? And that's essentially what internal structure is. So in this instance, it was kind of one impulsive leg down. So there wasn't like that internal pullback like I spoke about. But if there was, then we would look for the price to break that. That would be your bullish IBOS. Okay, this would still be the swing high, this would be the swing low, and then this would be like that swing pullback, okay, in that instance. But sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes you don't get an internal pullback in the leg, and it can be quite impulsive in just one big movement, okay? So then we get the bullish change of character, and at that exact moment that happens, yes, it's an early indication that we may be getting that larger swing pullback, but for now, all the chalk signals is that we're getting an internal pullback, right? It's the start of an internal pullback because you could get a bit of a movement like this, then you could get a bearish chalk, right? And then we could continue down. And that for me wouldn't be enough to be considered a swing pullback, right? Compared to the recent price action. So that's why in this instance, change of character only signals the start and end of internal structure, right? Internal pullbacks. Then you'd get a bearish chalk. That would signal the end of the internal pullback, and then we continue down, right? But it's only once you get that bullish IBOS here, when you break the internal structure, that's when we have the true confirmation that we're getting that swing pullback from a structural perspective, okay? But this will become clear as we go through more examples, so don't worry if it's a little bit too confusing at this point. So, I know I'm being pedantic here, but I have to go over this loads of times just so it really, really sinks in. So change of character signals the start of a potential internal pullback, okay? So we get that internal pullback, price comes down, okay, and again, we could get another bullish change of character here, and that just signals the end of this internal pullback, and now we're ready to take out this weak high, right? This is a weak internal high because it failed to take out the low, and then when we get that bullish IBOS here, and we get that break of the internal high, okay, now we have kind of true structural confirmation that we're gonna get this larger swing pullback, okay? So again, IBOS will signal kind of the start and end of a swing pullback. But in terms of when you can define and draw on kind of your gray circle of when you've seen enough of a swing pullback, that will be determined on kind of how you visually see it, if it seems significant enough to you or if you use pip rules. But again, we'll get into this when we look at the price action examples, okay? So change of character signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? So again, we get another bullish change of character. That signals the start and end of this pullback. Now we're ready to take out the weak high. Then we actually get that IBOS. Okay, now we're starting to see that structure form. We're getting the swing pullback. Again, we pull back, we come to the downside, and then we get a continuation of that bullish internal structure, okay? So this whole time that this is all happening, everything I just spoke through, remember, the swing structure is bearish because that was the swing breaker structure. That is our swing high. Now we've had a sizable pullback, so we can mark out our swing low. So now we know what swing range we're within, right? As soon as we have enough of a pullback that we deem relevant to be a swing pullback, we can mark that as our swing low, and then we know that we're trading between this swing range. So when the internal structure shifts bullish, when we get that bullish IBOS, right, that's just the internal structure shifting bullish to facilitate a swing pullback, okay? But the whole time, the swing structure is bearish. So what this means is it means that the internal structure is not aligned with the swing structure because the internal structure has to shift bullish to facilitate that larger swing pullback, okay? So as price starts to pull back up and it gets nearer towards this swing high, we know that the swing high is a strong high, right? Why is it strong? Well, it's strong because it did its job. It broke the swing low, right? It caused a break of structure. It took a lot of money to do that. So that's why we know that this is a strong high. So our expectation is as price pulls back up towards it, what do we expect? We expect that price won't break the swing high because we expect that the swing structure will continue until it doesn't, right? We expect that the swing trend will continue bearish. So as we come up towards the swing high, obviously the probability that the pullback is going to be over is increasing now. The nearer we get to the high, right, the higher the probability that this is now ready to finish pulling back. And now we're probably ready to continue the overall swing trend, right, with that next pro swing trend run to the downside. So after we get this bullish IBOS here, right, and we get a little fractal pullback, so like 1 or 2 candles sort of pausing, right? You guys should know how to mark out your fractal structure, right? We get another fractal continuation. Okay, fine. This becomes our active fractal low. Then price pulls down and then we get that bearish change of character. Just like how I said down here, when we got the bullish change of character, right down here, that was the first signal that potentially we're getting the swing pullback, right? But at that moment, change of character only confirms the start and end of internal pullbacks, right? So just the same case over here, that bearish change of character where the fractal structure shifts bearish, yes, potentially that's the first early indication now, right, that this swing pullback is finished. This overall swing pullback is finished. And now potentially maybe we're ready to get that next leg to the downside to take out the weak swing low. That bearish chock is the first early indication that may be happening. But remember the framework that we use. Change of character, so fractal structure, only signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? So when we get this bearish chock, we can go, okay, maybe now the swing pullback is finished and maybe now we can target this low, but it's not confirmed until we get the internal structure shifting bearish, okay? Again, I'm going to keep repeating it. I know it's probably way over the top for some of you, but it's really important that you drill this into your mind. So change of character signals the start and end of internal pullbacks, and then IBOS signals the start and end of swing pullbacks, okay? So when we get that bearish chock, yes, we can start to think about potentially we're going to get that move, but in terms of confirmation, at this point, all we can say is that we've had a bearish change of character, so that signals the start of an internal pullback. That's all we can say at this point. We don't have true confirmation of the swing pullback finishing, right, until we get that bearish IBOS. Because what could happen, and sometimes this will happen as you'll see in the live market, is we get that bearish chock here, we start to move to the downside, but remember, this is a strong internal low because it took out the internal high, right? So at this moment, this is the internal high, this is the internal low. So at this moment when price action is here, the internal structure is still bullish, okay? So swing structure is bearish. We know that this is our swing high and this is our swing low. But the internal structure, right, has shifted bullish. It's making higher highs, higher lows, higher highs. We get the bearish change of character. That signals the start of the internal pullback. And what could happen is it could come into this strong internal low because the internal structure is bullish. We could then get a bullish change of character here, right? And then what does that signal? That signals the end of this internal pullback here, right? And then we could be ready to continue the move, right? And take up this high. And that's what could happen. And potentially we could actually shift bullish on the swing structure. So that's why, if I get rid of all of these lines now to try and clear it up a little bit, that's why we do not have confirmation, true structural confirmation that the swing pullback has finished until we get the IBOS, right? We need the internal structure to realign itself with the swing structure, okay? Because like I said, it could come into here, into this low, it could give us a bullish change of character, the internal structure could then stay bullish, and we could continue for another move, right? And then maybe the swing trend will shift bullish. So once we come down and we actually get that bearish IBOS, and again, for internal structure, we need a counter body close, okay? So we need a counter body close to confirm breaks of structure for everything apart from fractal, because for fractal, we want to be super aggressive, and that's why we can use wick breaks, okay? So we get that bearish IBOS. Now, at that exact moment that we get that candle closure below, just like swing structure, we look back and we look for the highest point. Okay, so internal structure is very similar to swing structure in terms of the same rules that we use, okay? So when we get the break of the internal low, we look for the highest point, right? That took out the low, and that would be here. So that at that moment, we know that this is our internal high, okay? And that will be the internal range we're working from within. So then if we get a bullish change of character, we won't always, like sometimes price will just pull back without one, but if we get a bullish chock, what does that signal? That signals the start of the internal pullback. So when price starts moving to the upside, what is our expectation at this moment? Well, our expectation is that this is a strong internal high because it took out the low. The internal structure is now bearish. So we're playing between these two orange lines. That's our internal range. So the expectation is that price will not break this high. So when price is coming up to here, right, trying to short this is the highest sort of probability trade, okay? Why is that? Well, it's because the internal structure is now aligned bearish with the swing structure. So we have full structural alignment. This is a strong high, right? This is a strong high. We know that the swing pullback is now likely finished because we've had the bearish IBOS. We get the internal pullback into this strong high. So we're trying to catch this lower high. Everything's now aligned. And now we expect that the internal structure will stay bearish until it takes out this weak swing low. Okay, and that's it. Now, when we get this IBOS here, potentially we may get another pullback. But again, this would be our new strong high, right? Because it took out the low. That would be our new range. We wouldn't expect price to trade any higher than here. And then we can get short and then target that movement. Okay. So again, I appreciate there's a bit here to think about. So I'll just kind of give you a quick recap. We have our bearish swing structure, right? We get our swing lower low. We now know that this, right, is our swing high. We get a bullish change of character here. Now at that moment, we can start to think that the swing pullback may be happening. But for now, all we can say is just the start of an internal pullback, okay? So we get that internal pullback, price comes down, and then we get another bullish change of character here, which signals the end of this internal pullback, right? And then we get that IBOS. So now we kind of have true structural confirmation that we're getting that swing pullback because the internal structure has shifted bullish, okay? So we can follow that internal structure, price pulls back down, we expect this low should probably hold, right? And again, we get a break of the week high and we get another IBOS to the upside, right? So after we get that IBOS, what do we expect? We expect an internal pullback. It's just the same thing, right? So we come up, we get that bearish change of character. So, okay, now we know the internal pullback is starting, right? So we expect that internal pullback to come into here. But remember, that does not mean that the swing lower high is in place and the swing pullback is finished and we're ready to target this low, because what could happen is price could come into the strong internal low. It could give us a bullish chock, right? And then it could continue to the upside. So that's why, what do we need to confirm the start and end of this swing pullback? What do we need? We need an IBOS, right? We need the internal structures to shift bearish. And when we get the break of that low, now we have true structural alignment. The internal structure is realigned with the swing structure. That signals the end of this swing pullback. And now the expectation is that the internal structure will remain bearish until it takes out this low, okay? Because then when price pulls back, we may get a bullish change of character to signal the start of the internal pullback. But remember, this is the new strong protected internal high. Price shouldn't trade any higher than that. So when we get that pullback, we want to look for those high probability shorts now to target at least a weak internal low, but it should stay bearish until it takes out the weak swing low. Okay. And that's basically the whole framework in which we use with these three types of structure. Fractal structure, so change of character, signals the start and end of internal pullbacks. And internal structure, when we get those IBOSes, that signals the start and end of swing pullbacks, okay? So we expect a swing pullback. The internal structure shifts bullish to facilitate that swing pullback. Once the internal structure shifts bearish, that signals the end of that swing pullback. And now we expect the internal structure to stay bearish until it takes out that weak swing low. And then you repeat the same process, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. We'll go through some examples on the charts, and I'll just quickly kind of show you that more sort of complicated example we had at the start, right? It's the exact same thing, but obviously this is the bullish scenario. Again, I won't go over this super slowly, but hopefully you can see it, right? Swing higher high, we pull back, we then break that high, we have that break of structure, so we now know that this is our new swing low. After a swing break of structure, what do we expect? We expect a swing pullback, right? But it's not always going to happen straight away, so we can look for structural confirmation to tell us, okay? So when we're getting that swing movement to the upside, we're expecting a swing pullback. What do we need to tell us that the swing pullback, has confirmed or has started from a swing structural perspective? We need an IBOS. We need the internal structure to shift bearish. So this is an example where price comes up and we do actually get a reasonably big pullback, right? Bigger than a fractal pullback, but it's not quite big enough for it to be, classified as a swing pullback relative to recent price action. And then it continues to the upside. Okay, so that can happen. So we still haven't had a swing pullback yet. We're still moving to the upside. And that would be our current, internal low. Then we get a bit of a fractal pullback. We continue to the upside, but then the fractal structure shifts bearish. So we get a change of character. So at this point, we can start to think, okay, maybe now the swing pullback is going to kick in, but it's not confirmed until what? It's not confirmed until we get the bearish IBOS. So at this point in the live market, we get the bearish chock. We only have confirmation that we're getting an internal pullback into this low. Because remember what could happen? We could do this, right? And then we could get a bullish chock, and then we'd expect the internal structure to continue, okay? So that's why we have to wait for what? Wait for the bearish IBOS. Once we get the candle close below that internal low, we know this is our new internal high, right? This is the internal range we're working from within. We get a bit of an internal pullback, and now we can look to short this to try and play the swing pullback, okay? And that's basically it, right? So then we can follow the internal structure as price is pulling back. Obviously, then the nearer we get towards this strong swing low, because remember, the swing trend is bullish, right? This is our swing high, this is our swing low. The nearer we get to the swing low, the higher the probability that the swing pullback will finish, and we're ready to take on that move. So we have to be thinking about that, right? So as we then get a bullish change of character here, as we come into the strong low, okay, maybe now the swing high low is in place, and we're ready to take out that high. But remember, change of character only signals the start and end of the internal pullback, right? And at this point, that's the strong internal high because the internal structure is bearish, right? That's the internal low. So we pull back up into this internal high, we come up to here, we fail to take out the internal high, we get a bearish change of character. Okay, this internal pullback is now finished because we've had the bearish shock. Now price is very likely going to be ready to take out the weak internal low. So we get another bearish IBOS, okay? So we get rid of some of these orange lines. So then we get that bearish IBOS. This becomes our new internal high, right? This is our internal low. Again, we get another bullish change of character, signaling the start of this internal pullback. But in this instance, price does have enough juice to take out the internal high, right? So we get that bullish IBOS here. Now what's happened is now when we get that bullish IBOS, what does that signal? That signals the end of the swing pullback. Why? Because the internal structure has realigned itself with the swing structure. Now everything's aligned to ready to take out the weak swing high. Okay, so we get an internal pullback. This should be the new strong internal low, right? Because that's the internal range we're working within. So this trade here becomes a very high probability trade to look to buy this because this is when everything is aligned, right? So then again, that signals the end of that internal pullback. Now price is ready to at least take out this high. But the expectation, once we initially get this bullish IBOS here, and once the internal structure realigns itself with the swing structure, then this is a really key rule, right? This will help you. The expectation once that happens, again, not a guarantee, but the expectation once we get that bullish IBOS and it realigns itself, the expectation is that the internal structure will remain bullish until it takes out the weak swing high, right? So we can keep buying these strong higher lows, right? We expect that price will not break this low when it pulls back. Again, we get another bullish IBOS. We expect that price will not break this low because it's a strong low. So that means we can keep aggressively buying higher and higher up in the swing range to try and target the break of this high once we have that structural alignment. Cool. So hopefully that starts to make sense now, right? Swing break of structure, we need the internal structure to shift bearish to signal the start of the swing pullback. We get that with the bearish IBOS. We then expect the internal structure to stay bearish until it facilitates that swing pullback. Only once we get the bullish IBOS, which occurs here, okay, now that signals the end of the swing pullback. And now we expect those bullish internal ranges to hold until it takes out the high. And that's basically it. And what change of character helps us with is just showing the start and end of those swing pullbacks. It gives us a little bit more of an aggressive and early sign that structure is shifting, okay? Cool. So again, I appreciate that's a lot to take in. It can seem like there's a lot of moving parts, but we'll go through some examples on the charts, and with time and practice, it will really start to sink in. But this is a very mechanical framework that will, when you get your head around it, it will just give you such a deep understanding of price action, and it will give you so much clarity when you're looking at the market. So without further ado, let's dive into some actual real price action examples. So you're probably absolutely sick to death of hearing me, repeat myself over and over again on those theoretical examples. So let's kind of go through what I think is a pretty clean example here on the 4-hour chart on euro dollar. Okay, so I'm going to really try and take our time, go through it slowly, and see not only just how to apply those frameworks with the rules that we follow and how to map them and how mechanical we can be, but let's kind of try now to start having a think about what do these concepts mean in terms of expectations and how we can reprice action and like how we put them all together. That's kind of what we want to start to do now, right? So let's take it slowly. So I've kind of done this for us, right? And there's a few ways you could have arrived to this point of where you've mapped out your swing structure. So I've done it in a quite a conservative way. We're essentially viewing that as one swing pullback. That's obviously a break of that swing low, and then this movement up here. All of that being one move, and then that being the swing pullback, and then eventually it shifted bearish. Okay, now there's some slightly different ways you could have got to this point because you could have viewed that as a swing pullback and whatnot, but I'm going to talk about that in a future lesson. Okay, but for now, let's kind of ignore that and just trust me that this is the swing break of structure. And if that is the case, right, if this is the swing low that we've taken out from here and we've had a break and close below, what's the first thing we need to do once we get that candle closing and finishing? We need to know where is our new swing high, because remember, when the swing trend is bearish and we get that bearish break of structure and we get the candle closure confirming it, remember you have to wait for the candle to close, we instantly, with 100% mechanical certainty, know where the new swing high is, right? And it's the highest point that broke the swing low, right? After the low was obviously printed. So if you want to use a box rule, if that helps, draw a box from where the low was to where it was broken and then drag it up. And then where's the highest point? We now know we can put our pretty little circle just above this high here, okay? So that's how you basically find your swing structure. And then what I would recommend you do is you have a line tool like this, and you can pre-save some templates, right? Where I have 4-hour swing strong, and I'll always put that on where my strong swing high is, okay? And all that simply is some text in here. If you double click, it will open up, and you can play around with like the colors and all that stuff, right? And then I just have 4-hour strong, and you can make the text a bit bigger if you want, and you can change which time frames it appears on. For me, I just basically do it on I just want it on the 4-hour chart. I don't want it showing on the other time frames, just to keep my charts nice and clear, but we can worry about that a bit more when we get into multi-time frame analysis, okay? So bearish swing break of structure, immediately we want to map where is our new swing high, so we know the new swing range we're within, okay? We know we're bearish, we know this is our swing high if we've mapped it this way, okay? So after swing break of structure, what's the first thing you want to be saying to yourself in the back of your mind? We expect a swing pullback, right? After a boss, we expect a swing pullback on that time frame, right? Now, obviously that might not happen straight away, but that's okay. It's more just we have to start anticipating that one may kick in, right? And we have to keep our eyes open for that. So whether that's going to affect your decisions on whether you want to keep shorting this, you may always want to be a bit more aggressive, or maybe you don't want to short it at all, and maybe you just want to wait for that pullback to start, okay? So purely from a market structure standpoint, we're not going to worry about liquidity, we're not going to worry about supply and demand and all of these other fun things we're about to learn, right? Purely from a market structure standpoint, what's probably the bare minimum we need to look for to anticipate the swing pullback may be ready to kick in? We want to wait for a bullish change of character, right? Where we get that fractal structure shifting bullish, okay? But if that happens, what does that signal? It doesn't signal the start of the swing pullback, does it? It signals the start of an internal pullback, or at least an internal pullback. It's only when we get the IBOS that confirms the start and end of a swing pullback, okay? So let's zoom in a little bit and let's pay price forward, and we can kind of go through the actual examples of how it goes. Okay, so that candle obviously broke the prior candle's low, so we know the fractal structure is continuing to the downside. This candle fails to break the previous candle's low, okay, so we're getting that fractal pullback. Now, in the live market, when I'm looking at this and I'm mapping my charts, I'm not going to be mapping out like, this is the current active fractal low and having that all drawn out, just because I find it unnecessary and it's just going to clog your charts. Obviously, when you're trying to learn and do the exercises, it makes sense, but just kind of showing you how I would reprice action, I'd be aware of it, but I'm not going to be marking this out, okay? So I know we're getting a bit of a fractal pullback, but I'm not going to mark out my fractal structure. But I'm not going to put on my pretty grey circle on this low yet to define that as a swing low. Why not? Well, because I'm waiting for price to pull back a significant amount relative to recent price action to show me, okay, if we get a pullback like that, okay, that's pretty sizable, then I'm going to mark out that this is my swing low, okay? But I'm going to wait for that. For now, all I'm thinking is, okay, we're just getting a bit of a fractal pullback here, right? Bit of a pause in price action, that's to be expected. Okay, again, we're just pausing, nothing's going on, and then we continue the fractal movement to the downside, right? We continue to down. So then we keep going. Okay, then we get a fractal pullback here. So that's to be expected, right? Not going on, and then we get a continuation of that fractal move. Now, what you can mark out, and sometimes what I'll do in the live market, is I will mark out the current active fractal high with my chalk line. So I've got a pre-saved template for our chalk, just a dashed line, okay? Because what that tells me is when that high goes, straight away I know, oh, well, there's a change of character, right? Then it's occurred. So that's what you can do, right? Is you can track the fractal highs just to see where that change of character would be, okay? Now you can see if we zoom out, right? If you press Alt and R, that will reset your chart, or you can double click the axes. You see these little pause in price action? Relative to recent price action, they're nothing, right? They're just fractal pullbacks. So I wouldn't even map these as internal structure really, but obviously you can do, but that's literally all I'm thinking at the moment is we're just coming to the downside, but we haven't even had a bullish chalk yet. Again, then we continue down. So you see how this candle failed to break the previous candle's low. So we've had that fractal pullback, and then we've continued to the downside and we've taken out that low. So now this becomes your new active fractal high. So that would be the high to go that we need a bullish change of character. So again, we're just moving to the downside. Nothing to do just yet. We haven't had a bullish chalk just yet. Still haven't broken that fractal high. And then we continue to the downside, okay? So we've had another fractal continuation. So now we can adjust our fractal high to the last candle that failed to break the previous candle's low. So if we look back from where the break occurred, that broke the low, that broke the low, that broke the low, that broke the low, that broke the low. This candle didn't break that candle's low. So we now know that that inside bar is the current active fractal high. So that would be the high that price would need to break for a change of character. But again, let's zoom out and look at price action. So you can see here, it's somewhat of a sizable pullback, right? It's pretty big, but compared to relative price action, I wouldn't call it a swing pullback. But I probably would be happy to kind of mark that out as internal structure, right? You can see it's a bit of a pullback. but it's not quite, a swing pullback, right? So you could mark that out, as an internal break of structure. So you could use, say, a dotted line for this if you wanted to map that out, right? And essentially what that would mean is if price broke up above here, above that high, I would classify that as an internal break of structure. And it just so happens in this instance, it lines up with where the chalk line is, okay? So again, because that's quite, somewhat of a sizable pullback, not significant enough for me to be swing structure, but I'd call that more internal structure, that when you get a break of that low, okay, that's your internal high. If price now was to move up and break up and close above that, for me, that would be a bullish IBOS. It just so happens it's also where the chalk line is. So you'd have a bullish chalk and a bullish IBOS. And for me, that would be that structural signal that the swing pullback has started, okay? Now, this is kind of a key difference that I appreciate some people may get a bit confused. So a bullish IBOS for me will signal that the swing pullback has started, but it will not necessarily signal that my swing low is in place and that I can draw my circle on, okay? And the reason why is, let's say price comes up now, right? And it breaks and closes above our internal high and we get that bullish IBOS here. That pullback, right? That could happen. And then price could literally just then continue to the downside, right? And for me, that still might not look like big enough of a pullback to be considered a swing pullback relative to recent price action, right? Because I want to see something bigger like that, or I want to see a big swing pullback. So hopefully you can see now when we get the bullish IBOS, if that occurs, it's a signal that the swing pullback is starting, okay? But that doesn't then mean that defines that I now draw this as my swing low. To actually know where my swing low is in a bearish market, I need there to be a big enough of a pullback. Okay, so there's a subtle difference there. The IBOS signals the start of the pullback may be happening, but it doesn't necessarily define that it actually is the swing pullback. Okay, for that, I need there to be a significant of enough of a move. Hopefully that's clear, but we'll go through examples and maybe that will make a bit more sense, okay? So at this point, we're still moving to the downside. We've had an internal pullback, not big enough for it to be a swing pullback, and we're continuing down. That candle fails to break zoom in a bit, the previous candle's low, right? So we've had a fractal pullback and then we continue to the downside. So now we can move our fractal line there, okay? And that would be our chalk level. Now what you can also do is you can use, you could like draw lines out for I don't have a template for the 4-hour chart, I don't think, no, but you can use this for you could draw that as your internal high, right? I'm just gonna change this to 4H, bear with. All right, and this is what you can do in the live market as well, just so you know where kind of your internal structure is. And you know that's a strong internal high because it took out the internal low, right? And then this is your fractal structure. So this would be the high that we would be waiting for price to close above to give us that bullish IBOS to signal that, that structural confirmation that the swing pullback may be starting. Okay, so now we have a bullish change of character, right? So this is the first early indication, right? It's the first time that kind of structure is starting to shift bullish. It's the first indication that we may be getting that swing pullback, right? But we don't have a confirmation until we get a candle closure above the internal high. Chalk, all that signals is the start of the internal pullback, right? Because we could come into this 4-hour strong internal high. We could then get a bearish chalk. And what would that signal? It signals the start and end of internal pullbacks. So that would signal that this internal pullback is finished, right? And now we'd be ready to take out that weak internal low. So that's all change of character is. So you could see that and you could have other confluence and you could go, okay, now I want to buy in anticipation that we may get the bullish IBOS, right? You don't have to wait for the IBOS to try and play the swing pullback. It's just that we don't have confirmation. We don't have structural alignment until we get that for the swing pullback to occur, okay? So at this point, we've got a bullish change of character. We can look for longs, but you have to manage your expectation that it could just be an internal pullback. Then we could get a bearish change of character, right? And then we'd be ready to continue the overall bearish internal and swing trend, okay? So move to the upside. So, you could be getting long here thinking, okay, swing pullback's starting, all right? And then it just takes out the low there, right? So that's why change of character is the most aggressive signal. And because a lot of people would potentially see that change of character, they'd get in long here. And then depending on how tight the stop is, right, they might get stopped out with that spike because price does just break the low there, I believe. All right, it's subtle, but you can see, yeah, it just trades through it. Okay, so we've got a bearish change of character, but this is one of those complex examples where, excuse me, price came down. It took the low with this candle. So as it breaks that low at that exact moment, remember, we don't have to wait for candle body close for change of character because as soon as price trades below that in the live market, we only need a wick break. So at that exact moment that price trades below that low, this becomes our new fractal high, right? So you can then also draw your chalk line there. And then in the exact same candle, price then moved back to the upside, okay? So if you're not sure and you just come here and you haven't seen what happened, you just see this big candle, you need to check what order of events happened. Because if I remove these lines, right, and I bring it back to here, right, at this moment, the fractal structure is bullish, okay? Because we had that pullback, we had the bullish chock, right? So from a fractal structure perspective, you'd expect that movement. So if that happens, if price doesn't break this low and it continues to the upside, excuse me, that's just a fractal bullish continuation, right? We had a fractal higher high, pull back to form that fractal high low and continue to the movement, right? But if it takes the low first, then what is that? That's a bearish chock because the fractal structure shifted from bullish to bearish, okay? So that's why it matters if one candle, basically if you see a candle that's broken that high and that low like this, you have to figure out what happened first, okay? Because if price was here and it pulled up like that, here, I'll just show you. It's probably a bit easier if we talk through it, okay? And we do this. In this instance, let's check what happened on the lower time frame. So if we go down to the 15 minute, hopefully it'll load back, all right? We can see, that actually, so I think I was wrong here. It does break the high and then break the low, okay? So I think our bullish, if I go back to the 4H, bear with. Okay, so that's our bullish change character. Just gonna put this in a minute so we can see it. So we come up, and I think when we go and look on the lower time frames now, what we'll see is when this candle finished printing, which would be 6:15 when the next one starts. Oh, sorry, it's a 4-hour candle, so in 10 a.m. I think what happens is price comes up, right? So it continues that fractal movement, right? So then at that moment, this would become the fractal low, and then we get a bearish change of character. I think that's what happens, right? So we come up, and then we come down. So let's take a look. Yeah, so we can see that. So we had the bullish change of character, right? We pull back. We obviously don't break the low. And then what happens next? Do we break this low or do we break the high next? You can see if we draw our lines across, the first thing to happen is we break the high. So what does that mean? It means the fractal structure pulled back and it continued to move. And then in that same 4-hour candle, as soon as price breaks that high, remember, we can then mark that out as our new 4-hour low. So in that same 4-hour candle, we then get a bearish change of character, okay? So this is why chalk is super, super aggressive and it can change frequently, okay? So what's actually happened here? Sorry, I know that took a little bit of time, but sometimes you have to investigate and figure it out. And this is a good example for you guys to understand what's happened, right? So we had the fractal continuation. So at that moment, that price broke this high here. This would have then become the low. And then that same candle, right, came back down. So we went up and then we came down and then we took out the low. So we've now had a bearish change of character, right? So this is what I was saying about, you have to understand kind of when to use change of character as useful information. For me, this is just showing volatility. It's just showing indecision. It's not really giving me much information. Whereas this change of character here was useful, right? Because we've had a bearish IBOS, right? And then we get that bullish chock there. That signals, okay, some bullish pressure coming in. We're probably going to get a bit of an internal pullback now. But when you kind of get this, it's just indecision and price just shopping around, right? Okay, cool. So let's play fast forward a little bit. And then we move to the upside, right? So this is what I mean. When you get kind of choppy volatile price action, right, there's a bullish change of character. So it's all a bit messy. And this is the types of chocks that I wouldn't really be paying much attention to. Okay. And then we get a move to the downside. Now, so what I would do in the live market, like I said, is I would draw that one on and I go, okay, we've had a bearish IBOS, we've had a bullish change of character, I'm expecting a bit of an internal pullback, and then see these chocks here, I wouldn't even bother drawing them on or trying to, I don't care. It's just messy price action. We're getting a bit of an internal pullback, and that's all that would be, right? Bearish IBOS, we get the bullish change of character to signal the start of the pullback. We get that a bit more of an internal pullback now, right? That's kind of a relative size to this size pullback here. That makes sense, right? Internal pullback, lower low, internal pullback, lower low. Okay, so we've had another bearish internal breaker structure here once we get the candle body closure. Okay, so now we can move this down to be our strong internal high because that's the highest point that broke that low. Okay, so hopefully you're following me so far. So remember, this whole time we are within this bearish swing structure. We had that bearish break. We know that's our swing high, so this becomes our swing high all the way up here. After this bearish breaker structure here, let's zoom in a little bit, we are expecting a swing pullback that can kick in at any time. But this is a perfect example of where price can fall for quite a while before we get that swing pullback. Not always. Sometimes, price will literally break and we'll get that pullback straight away. So that's what I was saying. Have it in the back of your mind that the swing pullback can kick in, but we need to wait for structural confirmation, right? To help us to know when it's happening or when it's starting. So this whole time, even the fractal structure just continued to move to the downside, right? We come down, we pull back, we come down, kind of have this little fractal structure. Okay, now we start to get a bit more of a sizable pullback, but obviously relative to recent price action, it's not swing structure. That for me is just internal structure. Then we continue to the downside. So we get that bearish IBOS, then we have a fractal pullback, get that bullish change of character. For me, that just signals we're going to start, or it is the signal that's just going to start, we're going to get that internal pullback. We get some messy chocks within here, but that's when I'm not paying attention. It doesn't mean anything, right? That's when you have to learn that chock is kind of irrelevant. If you start taking highs and lows from within here, just realize that we're having a bit of a messy internal pullback. And then what happens, then we continue to the downside. We don't break the strong internal high. We get that bearish IBOS, and now we have a new internal range, okay? So now this is the high that we need to see price break and close above to get that bullish IBOS to signal the start of the potential swing pullback. And that's it. And again, if you want to keep labeling where the chock level would be, where would it be in this case? Well, if we look back, where's the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's low? It's the inside bar, okay? So that would be your chock level, right? Now we can keep going down, so price pulls back, just doing nothing. So now we get a bullish change of character, but again, is that super useful? Because it's right near into the strong internal high. You know, it's a sign, it's some sign that the fractal structure has shifted bullish, but you know, I'm gonna be waiting really for price now to close above this and see if we can get that bullish IBOS, right? So let's see what happens next. And then we break and close above it, okay? So now what happens is now we have a bullish IBOS, right? So that'd be a 4-hour IBOS. So I can use a dotted line for IBOS here. Again, I'll just be a bit consistent. There we've got the 4-hour IBOS there, okay? And again here. So now the bullish IBOS is the structural confirmation that the swing pullback is starting, okay? Now, remember the slight difference I was saying though, is I can only draw on my grey circle to mark out where my swing low is once the size of that pullback I deem to be significant relative to recent price action, okay? So the IBOS is just a signal that it started. And in some instances, right, you could be like, oh yeah, we've already had like a big pullback as well, so I'm happy to mark it straight away. Sometimes you might not be so sure just yet, because remember what could happen is you could get a bullish IBOS, but price could literally just continue down again. And you may think, you know, relative to recent price action, well actually that wasn't really that big of a pullback, so you're not so sure. And you'd wait for that bullish IBOS, and now, okay, that's quite a big pullback relative to recent price action, right? That's a big pullback. Okay, now I'm ready to mark it. So hopefully you can see there is a difference there. The IBOS signals that it's starting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready to mark out your swing low in this instance, okay? So let's pray price forward a little bit. Okay, now, right, I would say if you zoom out, right, that's a pretty sizable pullback compared to relative price action. So now I have a lot of confidence to mark out this on, you know, as my swing low. As obviously I'm using discretion to deem what is significant in terms of the size of that swing pullback there, right? And now I know what swing range we are working within, okay? So this is the swing high in this instance, and this is the swing low. The internal structure has shifted bullish. So now what do we expect? Now we expect, right, if I draw it like this, all right, now we expect this internal structure to remain bullish to facilitate the swing pullback, okay? Now, if the swing trend is going to change, and maybe the swing, because eventually the swing trend is going to shift bullish, right? It can't stay bearish forever. If that's going to happen, what does the internal structure need to do if the swing trend is going to shift bullish? The internal structure needs to stay bullish the entire time. So if you see this in a live market and you're waiting for the swing lower high to form because you think the swing trend is going to continue, but if you see that these strong lows keep holding, obviously this is a strong low because it takes out the high, this is a strong low because it takes out the high. If price comes into here again and continues up and it fails to break this low, well then that's what you can expect, right? If it keeps staying bullish, then we're probably going to stay bullish. But if we get that bearish IBOS and we break the low, we break the strong low, now what's happened? Now the internal structure has shifted bearish to realign itself with the swing structure. So now we expect the swing pullback is over and we're ready to take out the weak swing low, okay? But remember, what's the other key part that really helps us with trading decisions? When we take out that strong low, that becomes a strong internal high. So now when price pulls back, we expect that price will not break these highs. So now we can try and short these lower highs, and we expect these bearish internal ranges to stay bearish, right? We expect those strong highs to hold until it takes out the low. And that's really, really key, okay? Because it helps us build trading decisions, okay? So again, I appreciate I've gone through this very, very slowly and it can seem a bit pedantic. In the live market and everything, you'll be able to do this super, super quickly and it'll become simple, but it's just key to really kind of go over all of the small differences just to kind of hopefully squash any questions or doubts or concerns you may have, right? So the internal structure is now shifted bullish, right? But the swing trend is bearish, so we now know we are in the swing pullback phase, okay? Now, typically when you get swing pullbacks, they can be quite corrective, and you can get quite messy. It can get like, you know, the fractal structure you can have lots of change of characters, and it can be quite slow. That's just the nature of price action. Very typically what you'll get, okay, is when the swing trend is, say, bearish, is you'll get impulsive move to the downside, and then you get quite choppy and corrective and tricky price actions to trade for the pullbacks, and then pretty strong impulsive moves to the downside, and then again, quite corrective pullbacks, right? For the most part, that's generally how the market will move. And then the opposite from when it's bullish, right? You get impulsive moves up after the break of structure. You're kind of going to get those messy, kind of choppy corrective pullbacks. You can get fake signals, and it can be a bit harder. And then you typically get like quite strong impulsive moves, and then again, right? And that's just the nature of price action. So when the swing trend is bearish and we're going to be looking for longs to play this swing pullback, we have to understand that counter swing trend trading is obviously a bit trickier because we're against the overall swing trend, we're against the overall momentum. But if we're going to trade that pullback, if we're going to trade counter trend, we want to try and do it earlier, right? We want to be trying to do it now to play the pullback up to this. But we'll talk about this in a lot more detail later, okay? So, like I said, now expectation is that these bearish internal ranges will continue to facilitate that swing pullback, okay? Now, see in here, let me just bring it back a little bit. I kind of don't want to go through every single bit of price action to mark out on every single chalk, but I'll go through some of them just to kind of clear any doubts. So after internal break of structure, what do you expect? We expect an internal pullback. What will signal the internal pullback? A change of character will signal that, okay? So at the moment, this is obviously like your fractal high, right? So if price breaks that, which it does with one candle, so this is again another slightly tricky one where price takes the high. So at that moment that it takes the high, your inside bar becomes a low because that was the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's high, right? Because you can see here, price comes up, it pulls back because it fails to break that candle's high. Then in the next candle, it goes up and it takes the high. So at that moment, this becomes your fractal low. So that should bear a change of character, okay? And if I draw this on, it'll become a little bit clearer on the lower time frames. So M15, sorry, 4-hour chalk. And then a 4-hour change of character here, right? That should bear a change of character. And there's your 15. Sorry, one sec. It's because I've got my templates to not show on the other time frames. There we go. And there we go. Cool, so then go down to 15 men. Okay. So you can see here, if you look at the order, did I draw that properly? Okay, so that candle starts at 6 a.m. So if we look down here, what happened? This is a good example to show you kind of have to investigate sometimes. Okay, so this is a bit of a tricky one. So this is where price actually pulled back first and then took the high and then took the low. So in this instance, actually, what happened, and this is why investigating the lower time frames is key, I had to think about that for a second, is when we had that inside bar, the next thing that happened once this candle finished printing was price actually broke this candle's low. So that means that price continued the pullback and then it went to the upside. So actually we haven't had a change of character. We've just had a continuation of the move, okay? So at this point, this would be the low that needs to go to get your change of character. And then that happens in the next candle. So that's where your chalk is in this instance, okay? So again, that was a bit of a tricky one, but hopefully you can understand why. It's because price pulled back, price pulled back like this, then it took the high, so that then becomes a low at that point, right? Once we break the high, and then we come down, okay? So swing trend is bearish. Again, I appreciate this is a bit over the top, but swing structure is bearish. We finally had that bullish IBOS to signal the start of the swing pullback. Okay, after a bullish IBOS, what do we expect? We expect an internal pullback. What will signal the internal pullback? A change of character, which we eventually got over here. So now what is the expectation? Now the expectation is that we're going to get that internal pullback. But remember, this is our internal low, right? Because this is the low that took out the high. Just delete the chalk here, just keep it a little bit clearer. Okay, so now what can happen is price can pull back, but from an internal structure perspective, we expect that this low will not be broken and we'd expect it to continue to take out that high, okay? So this is where we don't have structural alignment, because if we look at our swing structure, and I put on this circle here for our swing structure, this is a weak swing low, right? Because obviously it hasn't broken the swing high. But from an internal structure perspective, let me use little different dots here. Bear with me one second. From a internal structure perspective, we use these blue dots, okay? All right. This down here is a strong internal low. Okay. Now, this is when you don't have alignment, and this is what can be tricky because, like I keep saying, this is your internal structure. So this is our internal high. This is our internal low. So from an internal structure perspective, we expect a strong low to hold, but from a swing structure perspective, it's a weak low. So it's a weak swing low, but a strong internal low, okay? So sometimes you can have price pullback and swing structure will just be more strong, right? The pullback's over and we'll go, but sometimes it will hold, okay? So we have to see what happens. So we've had the bearish change of character. We're expecting the swing pullback and price starts to pull back, okay? And fails to break and close above the high, right? That's what we need to see for an IBOS. Now, there will be more changes of character in here, but this is, again, where I'm not going to be paying much attention to them because price is just choppy. It's moving sideways. You can get multiple changes of character. There's not much point in mapping it all out and we'll be here all day, right? It's not useful information. This is when price action is just a bit choppy and corrective, which can often happen when we're getting those swing pullbacks. So in the live market, these will be those tricky periods that will test you where impatient people will give a lot of their hard-earned profits back to the market where there is no real clear intention. The price action is taking highs and lows and you can get chopped around a lot, okay? It might be a little bit clearer in the lower time frames. You might be able to do a bit more quick in and out ping pong intra-session. But typically when you see this sort of price action and you'll be seeing lots of change of characters within here, that's when you just have to recognize and take a message from the market that actually there's no clear conditions here. So I'm going to wait for there to be clearer intentions and wait for the market to just be a bit clearer. There's no other scenario than that. So now we're starting to break out of that little range a bit more. It's getting a bit more clear, okay? But remember, at this point, what we're expecting from an internal structure perspective, we're just expecting that pullback and then looking to go. So kind of when we clear out of this mess, now what you can start to think about is, okay, now change of character would be a bit more useful to look for. Because if we came down like this, we had a fractal pullback, and then we got a bullish change of character here, what would that signal? That would signal the end of the internal pullback. And now change of character becomes a bit more of useful information, right? Because now we can go, okay, bullish chalk. Now let's look to try and target at least this high with the potential we could have that deeper swing pullback. Okay, whereas when it's in here and you're marking the chalk there and then maybe a chalk here, chalk wherever it is, I'm not going to do it accurately. That's when I'm not bothered. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not as relevant. Whereas when we're moving up here nice and strong and then we got the bearish chalk here, okay, well that's the start of what we're expecting the pullback. Now we kind of pull back a bit and we're down here. Okay, now I'm probably expecting that pullback's going to end. So now we get the chalk, it's more relevant. Okay, that's kind of a key point of when to pay attention to chalk and when not to. So let's see what happens. Pull back. And then we get a break of that low. So if we're looking for the change of character, this would be the high that we need to see go, okay? And then we get a bullish chalk, okay? So now I'll be thinking that signals the end, likely end, not guaranteed, but the likely end of this internal pullback. And now price is ready to take out this weak internal high to continue to the upside. And now potentially we can look for longs, to try and get from within here, right? And what you can expect is you can get, definitely don't want that. You can expect sometimes price to then make a series of higher highs and higher lows, right, to then take out the high. But you see in here, sorry, I didn't mean to shout there, but I get excited. We got a bullish change of character, right? And then we come up, and then we get a fractal pullback, and then we come up, and then we get a bearish chalk. So yes, it's not a good sign, and that could mean then we're getting a deeper pullback. But if you read too much into all of these charts, but ultimately we're moving sideways in a range, that's when I don't weigh too much importance on them. I'm aware of them, I'd mark it out. It's definitely a bearish confluence to signal that potentially we're maybe going to get another leg down for sure. But it's again knowing that it's not super relevant because when you just look at price action, it's moving sideways, okay? And then we eventually, let's see, get a break and close. I think it happened around here. And definitely has now above the internal high, okay? So we get another bullish IBOS. Our new internal low becomes the lowest point that took out the high. Just the exact same way we would map swing structure. Look back, where's the lowest point? And now you can mark out your new internal range, right? So this becomes your new strong internal low. So again, just going to kind of do a quick summary. We've had a swing breaker structure. After swing breaker structure, what do you expect? We expect a swing pullback. What signals a swing pullback? We wait for an internal breaker structure. We had that bullish IBOS. Right, we've had the pullback and now we've had another breaker structure. So what we're expecting price to pull back again and continue to the upside. But remember, swing structure is king. Swing structure is more important, right? Swing structure is at the top, then you have internal structure, and then you have fractal structure in terms of importance. So yes, the internal trend is bullish, and yes, we expect from an internal structure perspective that these strong lows will hold, but eventually, right, that swing pullback is going to finish. We expect this strong high not to break, and eventually this is going to change trend, okay? So that's what I was saying. We can trade this internal structure and we can look to get longs and catch these internal higher lows, but we always have to be aware in the back of our minds that the higher that price pulls back up into these levels, which we'll talk about with more confidence with supply and demand and premium prices and all that fun stuff, you have to be thinking, okay, here's a better way to think about it. What is the objective of internal structure? In this instance, the objective of the internal structure is to facilitate a swing pullback. So as we start to realize that that swing pullback is probably, coming to an end, then, you have to be worried that at any point this could shift bearish, okay? So I'm going to speed this up a little bit now and be a little bit quicker. I don't want to go through every little bit of price action because obviously this will be an hour-long video. But if we had this IBOS and we'd be in the live market, we go, okay, let's keep our eye out for a bearish change of character. We should be on here, and that will signal the start of the next internal pullback. So let's see what happens. Then we get it. Okay, now we're expecting an internal pullback. So at this point, you could go, okay, we've had a bearish chart. Maybe the swing pullback is starting to end, and maybe we can look for that movement, but we don't have confirmation of that until what? Until this low goes. We need the bearish IBOS to confirm that. Whoops. So let's see what happens. I'll do this a bit more quicker. Again, I'm not going to mark on every single change of character, but we come in towards this low, come into near the strong low. What do we get? We get the bullish chock there. Okay, so that's a pretty good sign. Potentially that new internal high low is ready. And now we can expect price to do what? To take out the weak internal high, right? So you can see how it's the same framework, but we're just applying it to like the internal price action. If I draw that on over here. Okay. And that's just kind of, the useful areas in which you use chalk. And then you can look for longs to try and take out the weak internal high up here, okay? And you may want to have templates here that says like weak internal high and strong internal low and all those things, if it just helps you to know what range you're playing within, right? And again, it's a bit of a tricky range. Like this is quite tricky price action to trade, right? It's quite range bound. But that's what I was saying. When you're playing those swing pullbacks, that can very often be what happens. But you see how if I hide all the analysis, there's a tool over here on the left-hand side you can't see off screen. It can temporarily delete or it just hides all your analysis. You can see what's happening. Price is just moving sideways. It's taking the highs, retracing, taking the lows, retracing. It's choppy price action. But if you apply our mechanical framework to it, you see how you can make a little bit more sense of it. Now, I'm not saying it will be easy to trade and easy to make money out of. You're probably going to take a few hits in here and it's probably going to get a bit confusing. You might get chucked around a bit, especially on lower time frames on an intraday basis. But you can always come back to this framework and have a better understanding of, on the basis of probabilities, right? We can see that this is the more likely case of what's happening. So you're not always going to get nice pullbacks, then, chalk, okay, straight away we can get in long and target here. You might get thrown around a little bit. But it's not always about being able to perfectly trade it. It's about having a framework to base trade ideas around and have a higher probable expectation of what is more likely to happen. And we knew that when we pulled back into this strong internal low and we got a bullish change of character, it was pretty likely the internal pullback was over and price is probably going to start to make its way to target this high. And then we can look for trade ideas in here from within here to try and target that high. And that's why we don't want to be shorting from like this high, because we know that price is probably ready to want to come up here, right? As soon as we get that bullish IBOS, because we get a break and candle closure, what can we do? We can move this to the new internal low, which is the lowest point that took out the high. Remember, again, you can use the box rule. It's the same with internal structure, swing structure. From where the high breaks to from where the high formed to where it breaks, where's the lowest point from within there? It's here, right? That's the lowest point of that pullback. That becomes our new internal structure. Okay, and then we come to the upside. Now, there's no change of character here because where would that have to be? It would have to be... Where was the last candle to fail to break the prior candle's low? It was this inside bar, but if we draw it across, we can see that this candle traded lower, so that's one of those scenarios in which you need to move it along, okay? So change of character is not always going to be nearby to signal it, and that can just be the case, right? Now, there's other confluence in here we can start to anticipate where that swing pullback may start to end before we get the IBOS, okay? So you don't have to wait for a bearish IBOS in order to try and short this and target this low. You don't have to wait for the IBOS. That's not what we're saying here. It's just that the IBOS is when we have confirmation that pullback is over and it's much higher probability that now price is ready to take out the low, okay? I do want to make that very, very clear. You don't have to wait for that. You can get in before, but it's once we have that bearish IBOS that confirms that the pullback has finished, right? Okay. So what ends up happening is we get a bearish change of character, and then the strong internal low starts to hold, okay? And we then get a bullish change of character, right? So see here how this takes that fractal high. Why is that a bullish change of character? Because you can see this candle failed to break the previous candle's low. So we had a fractal pullback and then we took the high. So as we come into this strong low and we see a bullish change of character, purely just from the confluence that we know at the moment, single time frame analysis, just looking at structure, you would say that's a pretty good sign that internal pullback is now over. And now we could anticipate, right, that we're now ready to take out the weak high. And that is absolutely true. It's absolutely the case. But you just have to understand, again, remember, you have to build a portfolio of evidence based on the confluence that you use to know, when things are likely to play out and when not. And in this case, remember what I was saying the whole time, the deeper we have that pullback, the higher the probability that the swing pullback has now likely finished and we're ready to continue that movement. So you always have to be aware in the back of your mind that yes, this is a strong internal low, but at some point this is going to fail. We are going to get that bearish IBOS, and then we are going to be ready to go. Okay, and there will be other confidence that you're going to learn soon that will help us to anticipate that ahead of time. Okay, so in this instance, what happens? We get a bullish change of character. It pulls back a little bit. Okay, and then we get the bearish change of character, and then we get the bearish IBOS. So now when this happens, this is when we have that true structural alignment, okay? Again, going to zoom out. We've had the end of the swing pullback. We've had the bearish IBOS. So now the expectation is that this becomes our strong internal high. We expect price to pull back and not break that high. And price is now ready to take out that weak swing low, okay? So let me just play this forward a little bit and then we'll kind of summarize it in a bit of more of a succinct manner. And you can see price breaks and closes below that low there, okay? So that took quite a long time to go through. I appreciate that, but I kind of wanted to go through all the little details and I try my best to kind of think of the questions that may come up. Now, this is the type of thing in which it will become very, very second nature and you'll be able to see it straight away and you'll have all of the rules in your head and it will make complete sense. And obviously when this is happening in the live market, like these are 4-hour candles. This will take, from here to here, that's what, 39 days. So it plays out very, very slowly, okay? So you don't have to think super, super quickly when you're analyzing these timeframes, right? You'll have a long time to think about it and see how it plays out, okay? But what is the overall framework we'll go through? Let me try and be as succinct and clear as possible, but also, relay the rules. We get our swing breaker structure here. All right, so we know that this is our swing high. As soon as we have that candle body closure, straight away we look for the highest point and we can mark out our swing high straight away. That is 100% mechanical. When we have that bust, we have to start staying in the back of our mind that we are expecting a swing pullback that can start to kick in. To kind of confirm from a structural perspective that swing pullback may be starting, we look for a bullish IBOS, okay? We can also keep our eyes out for bullish changes of character, but all they signal is the start and end of a swing pullback, because after that bust, if price is coming down like this, you get a little bit of a fractal pullback and then you get a bullish change of character. You can look for longs, but you have to appreciate, especially when momentum is strong, that you're trying to catch a falling knife with just a chalk, right? You can get stopped out a lot. Again, you can take a lot of losses. So that's why we wait for a bit more of a sizable pullback that isn't quite big enough to be swing structure. And then if price breaks that and we get that bullish IBOS, okay, now that's a lot more confirmation that we're going to likely get that deeper pullback, okay? Now, one variation of what I just went through is sometimes you won't get an internal pullback in the leg like that and you get an IBOS. Sometimes what will happen is price will be like you get fractal pullbacks, so very, very impulsive like this, but then price does actually pull back quite a lot, right? It's quite a big pullback and then it does this and then it does that. So there wasn't an IBOS here, okay, but you get it here. And that's the example I showed you here, I believe. Here, yeah, like that's the bearish example, right? Where there wasn't actually an internal pullback in the leg, but you get quite a big pullback here and then the IBOS is there. And then you can get the scenario that I drove in here. Obviously this is bullish, but you do get an internal pullback in the leg, okay? So, you kind of just have to read between the lines of sort of where you deem to be the IBOS, which will kind of come with time and experience with that, okay? But yeah, we'll go through tons and tons of examples over, the coming lessons throughout the course and through all of the content that we do in the photon service, okay? And this will come with time and experience. So, like I said, right, we started to have price coming down, and then I don't think there was even a bullish change of character until here. But remember, at that point, we get that bullish chalk. We know this is our internal high. All we're expecting is a bit of an internal pullback, so we kind of mess around a bit, get that internal pullback, and then we get another bearish IBOS. So now we know that was an internal pullback. This is our new internal structure. And then we shift bullish. We get that internal break here, right? Then we get the internal pullback. Again, pretty messy price action, but I've kind of gone through that. Kind of told you to manage your expectations on how much weight to apply on chalks from within there. But then as we get the bullish change of character here, after kind of breaking out that consolidation, signals the end of this pullback, and then we're ready to take out that high. After a break of structure, what do we expect? We expect an internal pullback. It pulls down into the strong internal low. We then get a bullish change of character, signaling the end of that internal pullback, right? And now price is ready to go on and take out that high. So then this becomes our new strong internal low because that's the lowest point that took out the high. But eventually the internal structure is going to shift bearish, right? Why? Because it did what? It just shifted bullish to facilitate the swing pullback. Once it's likely that swing pullback has occurred, which again, we'll talk about in future lessons, how you can anticipate this ahead of time. Now it's ready to shift bearish, but it's only once it shifts bearish that we have true confirmation that swing pullback is over and price is ready to take out this week low. And what you'll notice is often when you get that alignment, price, not always, but price often doesn't pull back that deep. Like you won't get big opportunities a lot for it to come all the way back because, you know, it's all systems going out and it's ready to take out that low. So that's why kind of counter trend or counter swing trend trading, when you want to play those swing pullbacks, it's ideal to try and get, you know, do it earlier on in the move because that's when you can get the bigger risk to reward moves. But the more we pull back up towards, you know, again, I don't want to talk about confidence that you don't know yet, but the deeper we have that pullback, obviously the higher the probability that that pullback is going to have finished. And then that's where, you know, trying to keep buying up here gets harder and harder. And that's why then when we actually get, you know, the bearish eyeballs here and the internal structure has realigned bearish with the swing structure, that's definitely when counter trend trading becomes very, very low probability, okay? Because as you'll learn, right, there are demand levels around here and things, and price can come in, it can give you little bounces on the lower time frames. But you have to understand now, like you are buying against everything being bearish. Like everything's bearish at this point, and this is where like people who try to play those counter trend pullbacks get burnt a lot more, rather than when you're doing it over here, when you can play the pullback. But once the pullback's complete and we shift bearish, right, this is where you probably don't want to think about buying until we get the break of structure. Because when we take out that low, that's when buying becomes higher probability. Why? Because then you can start to expect that swing pullback. But obviously we're not going to jump in long straight away. We're going to go through the process that we did over here, right? We're going to wait for structure to shift, okay? Like obviously you can play price forward. You can see we start to get changes of character, right? And again, you can start to look to play, you know, these pullbacks, right? So on and so forth. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully kind of, you know, you start to see the framework. There's obviously a little bit to it. Price action can be complex in some scenarios. You can obviously get a lot of changes of character, but, you know, don't try and get it absolutely perfect in the moment and feel like you have to have a perfect read in the market. You know, there will be times when I literally come to the market, I'm like, I'm confused. I don't really have a clear read. The intentions aren't clear. Like when price action was doing this at the time, it was shopping around. That's when you have to do your best to just be a little bit patient and wait for the right moments to strike. But then you'll get times where price action is very, very clear, right? And it breaks out and you can see those movements and it becomes a lot easier to trade. And that's when you have to learn to be patient. But we'll get onto that later on in the course. For now, what I want your brain to be focusing on and what I want you to be putting all of your energy into is understanding the rules as mechanical as possible and understanding the framework and how we use it together to have an expectation of price. Now, again, one key thing, and I'm going to try and keep repeating this throughout the whole course, is just because we have an expectation of what we think is most likely going to happen next, i.e. a strong low should hold and we expect it to hold until it doesn't, just because you have that expectation, it does not mean you have to trade it, okay? So a prime example would be, yes, this is a strong internal low when price comes into it, and yes, we do get a bullish change of character. So yes, there's every possibility now that price could be ready to go and take out this high, but you know, when you learn other confluence and you realize that, you know, this has come into a decent supply level, we've had a swing pullback to premium prices and all these other things you're going to learn in multi-time frame analysis, you can realize that, well, actually, you know, there's a pretty decent chance we're probably going to switch bearish in internal structure. So yes, I could see a trade here and yes, it could play out, but I want to be a higher strike rate trader. I don't really want to risk my capital in these moves. So I'm just going to see what happens next. And you're going to either wait for that to happen or you're going to wait for maybe some more development. And then, okay, maybe now I'm ready to buy and I'll buy up here, right? So again, just because you have the expectation that this should be a strong low and we've had a bullish chalk, it doesn't mean you have to trade it. Okay, it's kind of one thing I wanted to make clear. But yeah, I think that's kind of everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully that makes sense. So have a bit of practice with this, apply the charts. And what I recommend is you go through the theory videos again and watch this video on repeat until it really sinks in. In a month's time, come back and watch it again, because as your awareness expands, you will realize things that you missed on your first time through, okay? But I'll leave that there. And yeah, hopefully you took some value from that. So hopefully you're starting to get a little bit more familiar with how we use the 3 types of structure framework just across one time frame that we're looking at so far alone. Now, we've gone through some pretty detailed theory. Obviously in the previous lesson, we kind of took our time going really slowly through pretty much what was just one swing range example, applying those 3 different types of structure to that example, right? Going through our expectations of price, and sort of, you know, the mechanical framework in which we used to manage those expectations and how to draw out and map that structure. So what I just thought I'd do is basically just do another walkthrough video here through a specific sample size of data. So starting from pretty much the start of March 2022 on the 4-hour chart on euro dollar. And the plan is to go all the way until the start of July 2022. Excuse me, bringing us to the example that we just did in the previous lesson. So what I'm going to say to you guys is, in a minute, pause this video, go on your own charts on Euro-Dollar on the 4-hour chart from the start of March 2022 up to about the start of July 2022, and just apply exactly what we just did in the previous lesson. Map on your swing structure, map on your internal structure, and then obviously look at your fractal structure as well. But what I would say is, don't get massively caught up in trying to label every single chalk. Kind of keep your main focus on sort of, getting your swing structure mapped correctly, and then looking at your internal structure and kind of just seeing the relationship between those two. Sometimes it will be a little bit messy, sometimes it will be a little bit tricky, but that's just why we have to practice. The market's not always super clean, and it's not always super easy to read at times. So this is a good time to practice that now. And yeah, obviously look at fractal structure, do map it, do look for changes of character, but just try to see like the scenarios in which change of character is clear and where it gives you useful information of, say, like after an internal break of structure, it then gives you a clean change of character, and then it signals the start of that internal pullback. And obviously then when it has that internal pullback, it comes into that, say, that strong internal high or that strong internal low, and then gives you another change of character. That then signals the end of the internal pullback. And now you can expect price to move and target the weak internal high or low. All right. So what I'm trying to get at is only kind of, for the most part, pay attention to changes of characters in those, high value areas in which we are expecting price to turn, rather than scenarios, say, when you get like this where price is super, super choppy, right? And of course there's going to be loads of changes of characters probably within here because price is just moving sideways and choppy. So yeah, like, aggressive type of structure break, it's going to happen a lot, and that's where change of character isn't that useful. So before I ramble on any longer, pause this video in the next sort of 20 seconds, I'll tell you when. Go and look in your own charts and take your time. Do from March to about July. Or what you may want to do is you may just want to do 1 month's worth. Just do March, then come and watch this. And obviously pause it when I get to the March, and then you've got a bit more sort of feedback, and then go and attempt April and then May, so on and so forth. Do it how you want to do it, but I would recommend really having a go at doing it yourself, because that will really highlight where maybe the gaps in your knowledge may be at this stage. Okay, so pause the video now and have a good go. Okay, so hopefully you've at least attempted doing March. Some of you may have done a little bit further. So I'm hoping this isn't going to take super long. I don't want this to be like a 2-hour video. So I'm going to go through it at a reasonably quick pace. So like I said, I'm not going to mark on every single chalk, but I kind of just want to drive home the main points, right? The main lessons of what we should be taking from this. So you guys from the 4-hour swing structure lesson, we mapped it together up until this point. So hopefully I don't have to spend kind of too long going through how we have swing structure at this point. It was a little bit tricky here where we had this last swing pullback, push down. We eventually got the break and closure above here, which then meant that the lowest point from where that high broke, it stayed in the same point, right? That was our swing structure. Then we had a pullback and another break. So that became our swing low. Price then took that low with one straight movement. So that became our swing high. As we can see in 2 attempts, it failed to close above. So they were just liquidity grabs, which again, you'll learn later on in the course. Failed to close above, so we remained bullish, and then eventually we came down, and if we get rid of all of these orange lines, we broke and closed below there. So that brings us to now. Like I said, as soon as we get that candle closure below the swing low, we instantly at that moment know where the swing high is. It's the highest point that broke the low after the low form. So if we want to use the box, right, to where it broke, that's the highest point. So the swing high in this case remains in the same place. So if you want, right, you can draw on your swing high there just to always keep in the back of your mind. It makes it nice and clear what swing range we are currently trading within, right? Cool. Now, in these cases, it's kind of a not unique case, but a slightly rarer case where price initially tries to break and close below the low, but it fails to do so in its first attempt. And then eventually we do get that break and close below. But as we can see, price fails to close below sort of this kind of most recent spike. So I'm still mechanical because price has closed below the low here, the actual swing low. So we have had the boss, right? And this is the new range. But just as a little bit of extra thought, I guess, is in the live market, I do kind of also like to see price continue to break below there as well to kind of just give that true confirmation that we are going. So if this happens in the live market where it fails to close below that spike, I still will map this as a boss, and this is still my new swing high. But just kind of as an extra talking point, yeah, I do typically like to kind of see price really commit to it, just because sometimes you can get a sweep of that low and it can continue up. But anyway, just thought I'd mention that there whilst it's here. So we have had the swing break of structure. What do we expect after a swing break of structure? We expect a swing pullback, okay? So the first little sign we can look for at least is a change of character. So we've had a bit of a fractal pullback and we've continued to the downside. So what I'm going to do in this instance is I'm just going to use a dashed line to represent where the chock would have to occur for it to be in that instance. Okay, so we can see that was the fractal pullback. This was the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's low, because all of them break the previous candle's low as it goes on, right? So that's the last fractal high. So that would be the bullish change of character. Okay, so let's play price forward a little bit. In that instance, so this looks like a bit of a tricky chock. It looks like we took the high and the low, but let's confirm on a lower time frame. No, we took the low first and then the high. So we have had a bullish change of character there. So a bit of a messy one. So again, I'll quickly explain that. What happened in this instance is price pulled back up to here, and then this next candle, it took the low first and then it took the high. So we did actually have a bullish change of character here, but as you can see, like, it's quite corrective, right? We're kind of struggling to break these lows. It's just a chock. We failed to close above. And this is a perfect instance in which it is a bullish change of character, because change of character is mechanical. It either is or it isn't. But what requires your human judgment is to decide, what is that going to mean for you? Is in like, are you paying much attention to this? Are you seeing that and going, okay, yeah, we're definitely going step side now. I want to buy and I'm expecting this move. Or if you're already short, is that going to, make you take all your profits and run, sort of thing? In this instance, I would be like, okay, it's a bullish scenario, but we haven't really gone anywhere. We failed to break above the high. Everything's still pretty bearish. I'd want a bit more development. I wouldn't really be that convinced either way. It's not that convincing. I want to see what happens next. Let's see. Not really going anywhere. We're just trading in between there, not doing anything. Okay, and now we continue to the downside, right? So in this case, it was just a liquidity grab to grab the orders behind the high, and we've continued down, right? So that's the type of instance where price is just a bit choppy. You don't have to pay too much notice to that bullish change of character. This would be the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's low. So this would be the current chock line, okay? And now we continue to the downside, right? So let's keep going. I'm gonna go at a reasonably quick pace here, and it just keeps dumping, so no point leaving that up there. All right, so we keep going. That's quite a decent pullback. Again, that's not a swing pullback, right? It's a couple of candles. I barely wouldn't even really call that internal structure. That's more just fractal structure. So that would be the high that I would need to see go. So this is a classic example of where we get the breaker structure. We're obviously saying to ourselves, let's start to think about a swing pullback. But that doesn't mean, one, you can't keep looking for shorts or hold on to your shorts, because in some instances, right, price can be very, very impulsive, and this can happen. And then you'll see in other market environments, you can literally get the boss and then price can pull back straight away. So we never know what's going to happen. Obviously, it's the market, it can do what it wants. But there obviously will be other confluences in which we'll start to look at, in which we can anticipate when it might free fall and when it might come in. But we'll get to that at a later point, okay? So for now, it's just tanking hard. Let's see what happens next. So in this instance, I think this is another instance where it takes the low and then it takes the high. So let's have a look on the lower time frame. And we can see, so we can see here, right? This would have been the 4-hour fractal low. It pulls back, and then what happens? We come down and we take the low, right? So when we take the low, now where's the new fractal high? On the 4-hour chart, it would be up here, and then we take the high. So in one candle, we had a continuation and then the chock on the 4-hour chart, okay? So a bit of a messy one, but this is how sometimes it can happen. So now we've had the change of character on this high here. I'm going to zoom in and give me 1 sec. Okay. So that's it here, right? We get the fractal pullback. Then in this next candle, it takes the low. So at that exact moment, right, we can then draw the fractal high here, and then price gives us a bullish change of character. So again, not the cleanest of chocks in the world. We haven't even closed above. It could just be coming into this high to roll over. So not that convincing just yet. I need to see a bit more sort of confluence to really be convinced, we're starting to pull back, but it is still a bullish change of character nonetheless. And obviously we're quite overextended now. So let's see what happens next and play this forward a few candles. Just chopping around, no real commitment just yet. Okay, and now we're starting to break above these highs, okay? So that's a bit more sort of positive confidence for me, and this is where you can label that as now your first sort of bullish IBOS, right? As, it's a lot more convincing sort of that just fractal structure. So you can see here now prices come up, like we had the bullish change of character, a bit of a pullback here, and then continue to the upside, okay? So yes, it's not the most prominent sort of internal structure in the world, but sometimes you won't get massive pullbacks, and it can be a little one like that, and that'd be the first indication. I go, okay, now that's a much stronger signal that we're going to get sort of this internal pullback or internal structure shifting bullish to facilitate that swing pullback, right? And then what do we look for? We look for the internal structure to shift bearish to signal the end, and then we can target the weak swing low, right? Now, in this instance, I probably wouldn't mark out my 4-hour swing low just yet, simply because although we've had a bullish IBOS, if price was then to continue to the downside, right, I wouldn't view that as significant of a swing pullback, right? Because then if we had a boss and then a break of that high, I wouldn't classify that as a 4-hour shifting bullish. That for me would just be a bullish IBOS, okay? So that's why a bullish IBOS, remember I've said this a few times now, it signals the start of the swing pullback, but it doesn't confirm we've had enough of a swing pullback yet to define it as a swing pullback, to say that that's a swing low, if that makes sense, okay? It's a bit of a subtle difference, but it is important. So that's a good sign. And now this is where I'd have a lot more confidence, right, to start to look for longs from within here to play that swing pullback, all else things considered. And you can see now price moving to the upside. You potentially could call that another IBOS. It's not, again, not the most convincing in the world. I'd almost kind of really just view that as kind of one leg now. And then look for something like this to happen, right? Pullback, up, and then a break of that. That's kind of, what you're looking for here, okay? So yeah, this would definitely be, relative to recent price action, enough of a sizable pullback for me to classify that as a 4-hour swing low. So I'm just going to put that as my weak swing low, right? It's weak because it failed to break the high, and then we can put on our pretty little gray circle there, just so we know that that is swing structure, okay? So again, only going to focus on structure for now, but there's a ton of other confluence. So let's see what happened here. This is another tricky chalk situation. Did it break the high or did it break the low first? Because if it just pulled back like this and then broke the high, then it's just a continuation, right? Or if it did this, breaks the high, then that would become the low. And then if it comes back down, then it could be a bearish chalk. But let's have a look and just confirm on a lower time frame. Bit of a tricky one, but it looks like, it looks like it just pulled back first. Like we came back, right? And then we've gone up like this and it's just retraced. But I would say that would be the current low, fractal low. So let's go back. I could probably, be super accurate and check the 1 minute time frame, but it's not super important for now. And the data won't go back that far, I don't think, at the moment. So let's just say that's our fractal low, okay? Pretty sure that it is. So we're having the internal pullback. After an IBOS, we're probably going to expect that internal pullback to kick in a little bit, as in, we've had the internal structure shift bullish, and then what do we look for? We look for a bearish change of character to signal the start of that internal pullback. Then we look for a bullish chalk to signal the end of the internal pullback, and then we can target the weak internal high, so on and so forth, right? But we always have to be aware in the back of our minds, swing structure is far more important, it's far more powerful, and it is bearish. So the more that we pull back, right, the higher we pull back, the more the probability increases that the pullback's about to finish, and this is going to switch bearish, and eventually one of those strong internal lows isn't going to hold, right? So let's see what happens next. Okay, now we get that bearish change of character, and now we're obviously clearly having that internal pullback, right? So we can look to potentially play shorts, because there's every possibility, right? Although this is, a strong internal low, there's every possibility the pullback could be over, the swing pullback, and we could be ready to go out, right? There's always a possibility, because any longs, although you're trying to catch that internal high low, they are against the swing structure. So let's see as price comes down into these levels to see if it's going to fail or if we're going to get potentially another bullish change of character. So there's a bullish change of character here. Again, remember, chalks are the most aggressive type of structure break, and they can fail often, but it's the first signal that we have that that internal pullback could now be finished, and now we could be ready to go to take out that weak internal high, right? If this is your weak internal high up here, so let's see what happens next. And there we go. See, it was a fake signal. So this is the thing, right? And this is where you're going to have to learn later in the course other confluences other than the structure that will look to see where is a higher probability that this high low is likely to form. And then that's when we want to pay attention to chalk a lot more in the areas in which we expect it to happen, okay? So there we go. There's another change of character, right? Why is there a change of character? Because you see this candle fails to break the previous candle's low. So we had a pullback, then price came down and it broke that low. The exact moment it breaks that low, this becomes the new fractal high. And then we've had a change of character, right? So you can see that down, up, down, that becomes the high, and then we break it to the upside, okay? So now we've had another bullish change of character, right? Again, don't want to talk about some confidence, but as you guys know, right, some demand zones, etc., come into here, so we can expect it's a higher probability we're going to get that change of character. And now this is where you can look for longs for price to come in and look for buys to target at least the weak high, if the internal structure is going to remain bullish, okay? Remember, it might not. Again, swing structure is more powerful. This could easily just chalk to come into here, to come into this supply level and continue down, okay? So these are things, I want to manage your expectations, okay? These are not magic keys to the market that's going to give you a 100% win rate. It's just the probabilistic mechanical framework that we follow, for us to base trade ideas around, right? It's for us to bring a method to the madness of the markets, okay? So we've had a bullish chalk. That's our signal that the internal pullback could now be finished. We've already had a fake signal here, but this could be the one that now goes. And let's see what happens. And then we start to trade to the upside here. Okay, I'm gonna go a bit quicker. So yeah, again, you can see how here there was another bearish chalk, right? So it's just depending on when you want to pay attention to those or not. That is a bearish confluence, but the likelihood scenario is we've had a pretty deep pullback into a decent level, right? Now, if you kind of read between the lines, that was just a liquidity grab, fell to close below, like we're probably going to go for that high, okay? So this is where the markets can be a little bit messy at times. It can give you some fake signals with change of character, and you have to try and focus on the bigger picture, okay? And then we do get another internal breaker structure. So at that point, we've had a bullish IBOS, right? We now obviously have another strong low, so this becomes the internal low. We map internal structure the exact same way as swing structure in terms of when we get the break with the body candle closure, we look back for the lowest point that broke the high after the high was printed, okay? So you can use the box trick on this as well, drag it from the high to where it broke down, and where's the lowest point in that box, right? It's the lowest part of that pullback that becomes your new strong internal low. So now the expectation from an internal structure perspective would be what? That this low will hold, right? Price will pull back, and then we'll get another continuation of the high, right? And yeah, that's basically the framework. So I'm gonna go a little bit quicker now, and you guys will hopefully be able to read between the lines if there's any little bits I don't necessarily talk about, but we have a bearish change of character, right? Signaling the start of the internal pullback. So we'll have to see now, will price come in, potentially give us a bit of change of character, and that can signal the end of the internal pullback, and then we could be ready to go. But always, and I'll keep saying this, always manage your expectations. Swing structure is king, swing structure is more important, and at any point, right, this low may fail, and we could be ready to go. So you always have to bear that in mind, okay? So we come in, zoom in a little bit, so you guys can see it. Okay, so it looks like there was a bullish change of character here, a bit of a subtle one, where price came in, it pulled back, it came down, and then it took the high. So there was one there. See what happens next. We're going to come lower. Looks like we might do, maybe not. Yeah, come lower. Okay, and then we come up, and then that would be a bullish chock there. Okay, so again, a little bit messy, but you can see what's happening. Price is pulling back down and towards the strong internal low. The low holds, we sweep these lows, have a bullish change of character there to the upside, and then we're ready to try and take out this weak high. But obviously we need a candle body close, so far we do not have that. Let's see what's happening, a little bit of a pause. Do we get a break above? Yeah, and then we get a break above. Okay, cool. So now this becomes our new strong internal low here, right? But what do I always say? The deeper we start to pull back up into swing structure, although this is a strong internal low, at some point this could fail, okay? So you always have to bear that in mind. So we've had that break. Let's see if we can get a bearish change of character to signal the start of the internal pullback. And there we go. There we get it, right? Hopefully you guys can see the change of character. That was the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's low. So you can see that was the fractal pullback there, right? And then we go. So now, let's say, right, again, I don't want to talk about other confluence, but we come into a level in which we expect that potentially, remember always to zoom out and know where you are within swing structure. But let's say you have a very strong idea based on the confluence, which we haven't obviously yet introduced, but you have a strong indication that this could be where the swing lower high is likely to form. When we get that change of character, you can then look to short this, right? And you can look to target here, but you have to manage your expectations that we don't have structural confirmation of that yet. We don't have confirmation that the swing pullback is over until what? Until price closes below this low. Why is that? Well, we need a bearish IBOS, right? We need price to break below here, because what could happen is you could get short, you could be running really, really nice profit. Price could come into this strong internal low. It could give you a bullish change of character. You're hell bent on price has to take out this low now, but it doesn't. And then you take a break even or a loss, even worse, right? So that's why you have to, maybe take partial profits. All these things we'll talk about at a later date, right? But it's only once we get the break and closure below, okay, now there's a much higher probability that price is ready to take out that low, right? Cool. Now I promise I will go a lot quicker because I have spoken about all of these rules plenty of times, right? So hopefully you guys should be pretty cool with it. And as you can see here, do we get a bullish change of character? No, okay? We never get one. Okay, and that can save you from taking longs as well, because you might be happy to look for longs from with here and look for a hedge against your short or look for another leg to the upside. But this is where you go, okay, like this is, back here where we've only had the start of the pullback, you might want to be a bit more aggressive, right, in getting in the longs, because there's a higher probability that price has room to have that pullback. Remember what I said in the previous video, the deeper we have that pullback and the higher the probability that pullback is now over, it becomes lower probability to keep trying to buy these lows. This is where when price comes to revisit this level, you may want to wait for a lot more confirmation than maybe you would back here. Okay, there's just some things to think about as you get a bit more advanced with your trading, okay? But as you can see, price came in, pulled back, and then all of these candles broke the prior candles low, so there was no bullish change of character here. So this is when I would say, okay, we've had our bearish IBOS, the internal structure has realigned itself with the swing structure, and now price is ready to take out this swing low. And this is where counter trend longs become a lot lower probability, right? Because now you're buying against the internal and the swing structure. So this is where I'd say for the most part, especially when price is pretty impulsive to the downside, you've had that corrective pullback. Now we're expecting the impulsive phase to take out this low, okay? And that's where buying against this, for the most part, I wouldn't recommend, right? It's a lot lower probability for the most part, okay? So let's see what happens next. Do we start to pull back, have a bit of an internal pullback, right? But remember what I said, once you get that bearish internal structure, realign itself with the swing structure, the expectation, right, is the bearish ranges will hold until it takes out that low. Why? Because these will become strong highs because they break the lows, right? And that's very often what you'll see, okay? So I'll just play this forward a little bit. So we have a bearish IBOS there, right? Again, not the biggest of ones, but I would still view that as a potential internal break of structure. So now there's every potential now that this high will remain protected. And we go, but even if that broke, right, and we broke above here, then I'll be going, okay, we're probably just having a bit of an internal pullback for this larger piece of price action. And then I'll be looking for that to go, signaling the end of that larger internal pullback, right? And then you'd expect those smaller internal ranges to hold until that goes, okay? So let's see what happens next. That high doesn't break, right? And then you get another little internal break of structure here. All right, so now potentially price won't trade above this protected high because it took out the low. So let's see what happens next. And there we go, okay. Oh, we haven't got the boss just yet. Need to wait for a candle closure. And there we get it. Just about get it there, okay. So that's quite a good example actually of the previous, very similar to the previous one that we went through in the previous lesson, right? Where swing breaker structure, a few kind of, you can get, well, one fake, not fake chock there, but an early signal where fractal structure changes in character can catch you out a little bit, get a bit of a pullback there. Then we get a chock here. Again, not the most convincing, but this is where you don't have to get into long straight away. You can wait for a bit more structure. Then we get an IBOS, maybe not sure with that one. Then you get another one. Okay, now it's pretty decent. And you could even view that as one leg if you wanted. Then we get a bit of a messy change of character there to signal the start of the pullback, right, of this leg. We do get a bit of change of character here, but it ends up being a bit of a fake signal, right? Don't even close above, right? It's not the most convincing. And then we come down here and that's a bit more of a convincing chock, right? We come into a nice demand level. And then this becomes a lot higher probability, then look for the longs to target this high, right? So on and so forth. After that, we get the bearish change of character, signals the start of this pullback, right? Bullish change of character, okay, now ready to take out the high. Bearish change of character, start of the pullback, but we've had quite a deep swing pullback now, so there's an increased probability the pullback is over, and we're ready to take out the swing low, but we don't get true confirmation until we get the bearish IBOS. There was no bullish chock over here, so it can have saved you from a loss if you tried to buy from this low, right? That's where you're better off waiting for that bullish chock. That will give you a bit more confirmation if you want to try and target for another internal leg to the upside. Let's go to these lines. And then after we get that, now it's usually, for the most part, it's usually pretty impulsive to take out the low in most cases. And this is where these internal ranges hold, right, until it takes out the swing low. Cool, okay. So now we have a swing breaker structure and we have the counter body closure below. What do we know? We instantly know where the new swing high is. This one's quite easy. It's the highest point that broke the low, so it becomes this high up here. So I'm just going to move this to the downside. Cool, and then we can put our grey circle there straight away. Alrighty, so let's play fast forward a little bit and see what happens. So just kind of trading between this high and low at the moment. This is not really ideal price action. Failed to close above that high, so no kind of bullish IBOS there, but definitely a change of character, a bullish chock. So we could look for longs from within here, but I'd be skeptical that price hasn't closed above it, right? So it's not a very good sign. This doesn't become a strong internal low until we get that closure above. So this could just be a liquidity grab to go below. But you could also look for longs. You just have to understand it's not super high probability just yet. It's a quite tricky price action to read in the moment in the live market. There we go. The trend continues. And then we get another breaker structure there. So I would say that's a pretty sizable pullback compared to, whoops, I should have changed that to a boss there. A pretty sizable pullback compared to recent price action. So I'd be pretty happy to call that a swing breaker structure. Okay, so we can put our circle there. This becomes our new strong high. Okay, so what do we expect after a breaker structure? We expect a swing pullback. Kind of falling pretty hard at the moment. This would be the chock line, right? This was the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's low, so that would be our chock level. So let's see what happens here. Get another movement down, so then we can move our chock level here. Okay. And then all of those candles, I think, break the previous candle's low. Yes, that's all down one move. Okay, and then we get a fractal pullback there. And then that would be the high. Okay, And then we just continue down. So we see the trend's pretty strong at the moment. And then we get a bullish change of character here. Okay, considering how sort of oversold we are at this point, and it's quite a strong candle. I haven't really closed above, but I would say it's a pretty good sign. We may be starting to see at least an internal pullback here, obviously with a change of character. Let's see what happens. Don't get the closure above, so it could be liquidity sweep, but this could be your first sort of, if you're a bit more on the aggressive side, you can look for longs from within here, right? Obviously that caused a change of character, and you can look to try and play that move. So let's see how this plays out. Or is the trend going to be too strong? Let's see. Just kind of chopping sideways here. Do we get a bullish IBOS? Yes, there we do. So this then could be the start. Now a bit more confirmation that you're getting the start of that swing pullback for our IBOS. Okay. Yeah, so that's the start of the swing pullback. I'd probably say it's quite sizable now to classify that as a swing low as well. So now I can draw on my weak swing structure. Okay, cool. So now the expectation, right, would be that price will come in here and potentially the strong internal low will hold, and then we can get that deeper pullback. So let's see what happens. We get a change of character there. Again, you see that? Price pulls back, then takes the high, then takes the low. Let's just double check on the lower time frame that it did happen in that order. Yes, it did. You can see here, right? That's the high. So price pulls back, then it takes the high, then it takes the low. So there's your bearish chalk. Signals at least an internal pullback. There's always a potential, right? Like I always say, there's always a potential, because swing structure is more key, that could be the move that takes out the low, but we don't have confirmation of that until we get a break of the internal low there. So there's always a possibility this strong internal low can hold, right? And we could get that deeper swing pullback. Looks like it might be holding. Don't get closed below, so it could be a sweep. Let's see. Quite choppy price action is. If you look at this, right, we're just moving sideways and sweeping highs and lows. So this would be pretty tricky to trade this. This way you can get kind of swept out a lot. You just have to recognize your range bound. There's no clear intentions. And this is where you may want to be patient, right? And wait for clear intentions. Now we have clear intentions. We get the bearish IBOS and the bearish swing boss all in one go with that candle. And now you have something a lot clearer to work with. We now know where our swing high is, right? We can move this down to here. This becomes our swing high. Cool. So let's play this forward. Price continues to move to the downside. Then we get the fractal pullback. Then we take that low, which means this would be where the chalk line would be. Okay. And then do we get a break and close above? Yes, we do, but we also get a chalk. So I kind of classify that as, actually, excuse me, did I get that right? Yeah, I did. So that would be a chalk. It's kind of like an IVOS as well for me. So I kind of view those as the same, right? We've essentially had, a bit of a pullback here. All right, so that's a pretty good sign now. I'd be looking for this as like your protected strong internal low, and I'd be looking for a movement like that and see if we can get that. Okay, and you see that continued movement. So we come to the upside now, really starting to pull back, but we're coming in towards the strong internal high. So we expect that high to hold, okay? So from an internal structure perspective, all right, we've had that movement. You can look for price to come back in, all right? But remember, it's only when we get the break of the low that you get the confirmation of the swing pullback ending, where we can then target the weak low. Otherwise, if these lows can keep holding, right, you can anticipate a potential trend change as long as those lows hold. But the deeper we get that pullback into the strong high, the higher the probability that this strong low may fail, and then we may get that bearish eyeballs, right? It's the same framework again and again and again. So hopefully it's really starting to sink in now. So then, appreciate I'm going a bit quick here, but we got a bearish change of character there. All right, so that's your first signal, early signal that potentially the swing lower high may be forming, and we may be ready to go to take out the weak swing low, which I can definitely now mark on down here, right? But as you guys should know, change of character only signals the start and end of internal pullbacks. So we don't have true confirmation yet that the swing pullback is over. So when we see this bearish change of character, our expectation really can only be that it may be an internal pullback, like into some of these levels, some nice demand zones, right? And then if you've got a bullish change of character, that will then give you kind of that decent confirmation that internal pullback may be finished, and we may be ready to target that high, okay? Not a guarantee, but just the signal and the framework that we use. So let's see. Don't get a bullish change of character until up here, but then we continue that movement. So this would be your bullish chalk, okay, for the avoidance of doubt. That's where that would be. But you can now clearly see, right, that's a definite internal breaker structure to the upside, right? So when you get that IBOS, what I'd very often recommend you do, especially when you kind of have clear structure like this, is you can kind of map out where your strong low is. Obviously, you don't know where the high is until we start to pull back, but that's where it would be, right? So now when price is pulling back, it could just be to pull into the strong low. Let's see what happens, and then we continue the movement. And then we get a closure above, okay? So this is where we now have a swing trend change. But you see how the internal structure gave you an indication that that may happen because it never shifted bearish. Once we got that bullish, we pulled back, we got bullish. We can only confirm the swing pullback is over when this low goes. It never goes, price pulled back, right? The strong internal low hold, and then we continued up and we had a bullish IBOS and boss in one candle. Okay, so now we have a bullish trend change. So the 4-hour chart is now confirmed bullish. So let's see what happens. Right, and now this weak low now becomes a strong low, right? Cool. So we continue to the upside. That's just a fractal pullback. Again, another just a fractal pullback. So this would be where the chalk would be, right? So now we have a bearish change of character, okay? So that's the first indication we're getting at least an internal pullback, right? Let's see what happens. But we continue to the upside, okay? So that for me would be a bullish IBOS, right? A continuation of the move. Now, some of you may kind of view that as a swing pullback. I think relative to recent price action, it's not that convincing. But I'll talk about this in a bit of a later date. I think I'll probably do a whole lesson on this about, you know, whether you want to be someone who's a bit more, let's call it aggressive with your swing structure mapping, like where you view these smaller ranges, or if you're a bit more conservative. And actually, I'll explain to you how it doesn't really make a difference when you have a good understanding of how to read internal structure and multi-time frame analysis, okay? But I'll leave that for a bit of a later date. So for now, kind of just stick with me. Some of you may have viewed that as a swing pullback, and that's absolutely fine. Don't worry. You just kind of have to manage your expectations that if you view smaller pullbacks as swing structure, the trend may just change a little bit more often for you, okay? That's it, right? So for me, that would just be a continuation of the bullish internal structure. So for me, this would become a strong internal low. Okay, so there's every possibility now that price could just pull back into this internal low and we could continue to the upside, but I'm very wary that we've had a swing break of structure. So at any point we could be expecting that deeper swing pullback, right? And that's the view I would take with that. So let's see what happens here. A bit of a small pullback, but not really as convincing. It's more of a fractal pullback there. So I would still view this as my strong internal low. There's your change of character, as that was the last candle to fail to break the previous candle's high after that high went. So now we've got a bearish chalk, okay? So let's see if this internal low can hold or not. And we get a break and close below, okay? So now the internal structure is bearish. So now this becomes our strong internal high, okay? And the expectation would be what? That the internal structure will remain bearish to facilitate that swing pullback. And if this low is gonna go, then in theory, these highs should all stay protected until that goes, if we're going to strip bearish. Otherwise, you'd look for the bullish IBOS, right? And that would be the end of the internal pullback, or the swing pullback, I should say, and then we can target the swing high. So let's see what happens. So the expectation should be that this high should not now be breached because it took out the strong internal low. So we get a bullish chalk. Again, I'm not going to map these all out because we'll be here all day. Price action is pretty indecisive here. So again, this would be another environment where, could be a bit tricky to trade, may take a few losses in here if you keep forcing things. So sometimes when the intentions aren't super clear, you have to be a little bit careful, end up sweeping those highs, coming up into some extreme supply, grabbing the liquidity, breaking move to the downside. Again, I'm dropping some terms there that you may not be familiar with yet if this is the first time going through the course, but don't not worry. So we get another continuation of that move, right? So now this becomes our new strong internal high because it's the highest point that took this low after the low was printed. Again, just looking to play that swing pullback. Bit of a steeper move here now, coming strongly into this low. So remember, from a swing structure perspective, if you've mapped it the way I have, right? Again, some of you may have mapped this as your swing structure. So if you did, the swing structure would be bearish for you, and that's absolutely fine, okay? Again, I'll get into this later lesson. Don't worry about it. So we come into this low, and we're expecting the swing low to hold. We've had a bullish change of character now, I believe, because I think it took the low, then the high. Let's double check. Yeah. We pull back, took the low, and then took the high, right? So we've had a bullish change of character there. I'm going to kind of do this a little bit quicker. I know I keep saying that, but I do want to cover everything. So we have had a bullish chalk. I won't draw on just for the sake of time. So now I'd be expecting, okay, Swing structure is bullish, but the internal structure is still bearish. So I am expecting a swing high low to form, but I appreciate that this is heavily bearish, a lot of momentum. So I'd be a bit cautious, right? Because what can happen is you could get a bullish chalk and we can look for longs, but I would be thinking this could just be an internal pullback for this high, right? Just because, especially with how much momentum there is here. So I'd be cautious, okay? Because you don't have confirmation that the swing pullback is over until you get a bullish IBOS, right? So these are one of those instances where you need to just be a little bit careful when managing your expectations if you get long of how far price is likely to go. And obviously we've only had a very, very aggressive chalk within here, right? So this might fail, it might not. And there we go. And then we get another movement up, right? But this is a strong internal high. So let's see what happens. We get a bit of an internal pullback and then we continue to the downside. Do we close below? Yes, we do. So then this becomes our new bearish IBOS, right? So now we need to see this high go to get a bullish IBOS to signal the end of the swing pullback. Is the swing low going to hold? Yes, it is. And we get a bullish IBOS, okay? So now this would be a pretty good indication that the swing low is going to hold. And now we'd expect what? We'd expect the bullish internal ranges to hold until it takes out the weak swing high. So I should have put that on there by now. We've definitely had a swing pullback. And then we can draw this one here, all right? Cool, that's our weak high. So now the internal structure is bullish. This becomes our strong internal low. So now we can look for longs from within here to try and target up to the weak high. So let's see what happens. Price pulls back, comes into our nice level. We can look for longs and try and at least target this high with the potential we could go even further. So let's see if we can get another bullish IBOS. Okay, I'm not going to draw on all the changes of characters. We don't get closure above, so not confirmed just yet. It goes above. Nope. So it's not looking too good just yet. Don't fail to close again. Bearish change of character here. Okay. So pretty good sign that this low could be weak, right? But we could just come down deeper into this range and then push up to the upside. So it's not looking good for these lows because they're failing to take out these highs. So I probably expect these lows are going to go now. But what could happen is it could just take out these lows, right? Price could pull back into our strong internal low because this is the internal high and this is the strong internal low. It could come into here, give us a change of character, and then we could be ready to go, right? But it's not looking too good overall. Also something, it's a bit more discretionary, but I always say the characteristics, the nature of price action. See how impulsive this is? This is kind of quite corrective. So, but yeah, let's just stick to the framework and see what happens. So as we come down into this low, we do get a bullish change of character. Okay, so maybe this low is going to hold, right? That's a nice sign that potentially now we could be looking for longs to take out this high and ends up failing, okay? So yeah, bit of a tricky one that, but this is a perfect example of where we're always trading with probabilities. Sometimes we get fake signals. It is what it is, okay? But as you'll see, as we bring in more confluence, especially multi-time frame analysis, you can sometimes anticipate when strong structure on one time frame is going to fail because it can be weak structure on another time frame, okay? But don't worry too much about that just yet. So we get the 4-hour swing breaker structure here. So now the 4-hour trend has switched bearish, okay? So that was a bit of a tricky one. Where is our swing high? Well, as you guys should know, if you're ever confused, draw it from the swing low to where it was broken and then drag it up and look for the highest point. It stays in the same place, but this becomes our strong swing structure. Awesome, so that brings us to the start of July, which is the time period I said we would do because that's where we did a big example in the previous lessons. There's no point in kind of really going over that again. So yeah, so hopefully you kind of attempted this before I went through it. Look back at your analysis and kind of what you thought. Then, especially if you're not using mechanical rules to define a swing pullback, right? There may be some instances where, like I said, you may have viewed this section here as swing structure, but it doesn't make a big difference. The things I want you to really concentrate on are like the mechanical bit. So understanding like why a high or low is weak or strong, how to pick, where the high or where the strong high or low is, because remember when it's bullish, it would always be the lowest point that took out the high, right? There's no discretion involved with that. Things like that, make sure you have those nailed down properly. And also really starting to think about like, how to interpret the breaks of structure and what they all mean, like the relationship between internal and swing. So, when we get that swing break of structure, we get a bullish change of character. The fractal structure shifts bullish. Yes, that's the first indication we may be pulling back. But as we've seen, there's plenty of cases where that can give us like fake signals where we got a bullish change of character over here, but it was just a fake signal, right? And it's when we get the kind of more convincing internal structures, okay, now, right, this is a lot more significant that we're probably going to take out that high. But then obviously the deeper we get those pullbacks, then these bearish changes of characters of here, yes, although that chalk only signals an internal pullback and this low could hold, it's lower probability now that the internal structure will remain bullish. Why? Because we've had a deeper pullback. And that's where potentially you can think about, in the future, as we bring in more concepts, where we can look for longs from within here, anticipating that this low is going to go. And then obviously then we expect the ranges to remain bearish until it does its job, until it takes out the low. Like, they're the things I want you to be thinking about at the moment. Obviously, as we start to bring in more and more layers to this, it can obviously get a little bit more complicated. So, we want to make sure that you're very, very, very comfortable with these concepts on one time frame before we start to bring in everything else. So without further ado, hope you guys took some value from that, and I'll see you in the next one.